When Palworld first released, I set out to answer one simple question. Could I survive 100 days in Palworld's hard settings? Designed for players seeking a challenge, Palworld's hard mode was brutal to say the least. Players take 4 times more damage while the damage they deal is cut in half. Catch rates and experience are reduced by 20%, and resource generation is reduced by a massive 50%. To make this journey a bit more interesting, I've applied some additional challenges and restrictions. I cannot breed, hatch, or purchase pals, meaning every pal I utilize must be captured. I have to add 100 different species of pal to my pal deck entries. I must capture all 4 legendary pals, and if I die, the playthrough comes to an end, resulting in failure. And for the record, I've failed this challenge multiple times. Though with each failure, I have learned valuable lessons, and as I set out on my 4th attempt, I sincerely hoped this time would be different. This is the story of my 100-day journey in Palworld's hard mode. On the dawn of day 1, I made my way into Windswept Hills, unlocking a travel point and gaining my first level as I collected resources. My plan from here was simple: set up a starter base before nightfall, though not just any location would suffice. With resource generation cut in half, I was going to need an early start on ore, requiring me to head north. After picking up my first effigy, I constructed a workbench and equipped myself with a wooden club, stone tools, a torch, and a few pal spheres. Equipped with my primitive gear, I applied my first 2 stat points, putting one into health and the other into carry weight, a decision that would soon save my life. With that, it was time to capture my first pal, and it wasn't long before I spotted my target. Launching a relentless assault with my wooden club, I took on what appeared to be a newborn Kativa. After beating it within an inch of its life, I deployed my first pal sphere, capturing my first pal while scoring some wool from a nearby lamb ball. Moments later, I encountered and captured a second Kativa, reaching level 4. Emboldened by my recent level increase, I came across another pal on my list, Gumos. Unfortunately, the level 5 Gumos was neither stunned nor amused by my surprise attack, and promptly launched a counterattack of its own, depleting nearly 90% of my health. Had I not utilized those stat points, it would have all ended here. Realizing that death by Gumos would deal a blow to my pride that I would likely never recover from, I decided retreat was the better option, and once I was a safe distance away, I put another stat point into health. As I traveled north, my health slowly recovered, and I continued to collect resources until eventually coming across another Gumos. Hoping to avoid further embarrassment, I deployed Kativa, and we made quick work of the Gumos, allowing me to capture it without much trouble. With Kativa by my side, catching pals was a bit less risky, and after a brief yet heated battle, I was able to capture my first Tanzee. Without much daylight to spare, we began closing in on my target destination. Across this narrow bridge is where my pals and I would lay the foundation for my 100-day journey. It would all start here. Together, Kativa and I constructed a POW box and laid claim to the ore-rich mountaintop. I then reached level 5 while laying the base foundation, constructed a wooden chest along with a primitive workbench, and spent the rest of the evening gathering wood and fiber for our beds. That night, I constructed my shoddy bed as the bitter cold of the mountaintop began to set in. Though there was no time for rest, and I continued my work through the night, I placed a few straw beds for my pals and put together a feed box. After filling the feed box with berries, I gathered a bit more wood and crafted a campfire just before dawn. As the sun rose on day 2, my pals awoke ready to work, and after an embarrassing battle with a couple of freeloading lamb balls, I gathered more wood, put another point into health, and began constructing a berry plantation. With the necessities out of the way, Kativa and I worked together to craft a common shield, and with my new shield equipped, I briefly departed my base to capture some more pals. First was Lamball, as I desperately needed its wool to craft cloth armor, and second was Tiefin, as we needed a water pal to water our berry plantation. Returning to base, I put Tiefin to work on the plantation, crafted a bit of cloth, and finally donned a set of cloth armor. Happy to finally have some clothes on, my next priority was to craft more pal spheres, but for that, I was going to need more paldium. Traveling to Windswept Hills, I used my last pal sphere to catch another Lamball, reaching level 6, before traveling along the river mining paldium nodes, eventually making my way to a fast travel point and returning to base. Back at base, I worked with my pals to craft spheres, a basic glider, and a repair bench, allowing me to repair my wooden club which had somehow become damaged. As the sun began to set on day 2, I put another stat point into health, preparing for the long night ahead. With my health improved, gear repaired, and armor equipped, I set out to travel through the night to a nearby location known as the Desolate Church, where I hoped to find 2 specific and very useful early game pals. Thankfully, traveling at night made effigies and chests easier to spot, and sleeping pals weren't the best when it came to self-defense. As I traveled, I managed to ambush and capture 4 sleeping Kativas, before encountering and capturing my first fire pal, a sleeping Foxsparks. Late that evening, I came across my first Dark-type pal, Depresso. Unlike other lazier pals, Dark types did not require sleep and could provide my base with hard labor around the clock. After a short battle, Depresso was captured, pushing me into my 7th level. By the dawn of day 3, I had reached the Desolate Church. After looting its ruins, I unlocked a travel point and began searching for my 2 targets. It wasn't long before I came across the first, Vixie. Arguably one of the best early game pals, placing Vixie in a ranch would provide free pal spheres, arrows, and gold. With Vixie secure, I set out to find my second target, Rush Boar. This useful pal could be mounted and forced into charging headfirst into mining nodes. While somewhat unethical, the practice worked wonders to improve early game mining efficiency. Fortunately, I managed to catch 2 rush boars on my excursion, and with my targets acquired, I returned to base and started constructing the ranch. After gathering a bit more wood, my pals and I got to work on several projects, laying out more straw pal beds, crafting an old bow, and finally building a statue of power, which would allow me to use the effigies I found to improve my catch rate. With these projects complete, I descended into the valley below my mountaintop base as I was once again in need of more paldium. Fortunately, this valley was rich with paldium nodes, and I spent the rest of the evening mining and catching a few pals in the process, eventually reaching level 8. As the sun set, I used a nearby travel point to return to the mountaintop, where I was warned of an incoming raid, though it did not take me long to realize that the raiders were all at the base of the mountain and had no chance of reaching the base. After realizing the raid was not a threat, Kativa and I finally constructed my pal gear workbench, and I spent the rest of the night gathering wood with Tanzee, filling the feed box with cooked berries, and placing another stat point into carry weight. On the morning of day 4, I crafted my rush boar saddle and a wooden bat to replace my primitive club. Following that, I spent the early hours of the day out in the wild, capturing another Vixie and completing my 10 catch bonus for both Lamball and Kativa, reaching level 9. After placing a stat point into health, I used my rush boar saddle to collect some stone and ore, before returning to base to construct a logging site and a much needed stone pit. With base production looking good, I decided to spend the rest of the day hunting pals. I caught some more T-Fence, my first few Chickapees, and my first 2 lift monks, reaching my 10th level before nightfall. As the sun set, I came across my first Syndicate stronghold. And while the Syndicate was preoccupied, I managed to steal the Arsox they were holding captive. Departing the stronghold, I continued my hunt, catching my first Pingolets as well as more Foxsparks before reaching level 11. Happy with my recent level up, I stumbled across a wounded Eiktherdeer and decided to try my luck. Fortunately, my luck paid off, and I captured the powerful pal without much of a fight. Soon after, I battled and captured my first Daydream, before stumbling across a wild Tombat. Little did I know, I was about to face my most difficult challenge yet. With limited visibility under the cover of night, it wasn't long before Tombat landed a punishing blow, taking down my shield, damaging my armor, and leaving me poisoned. Moving in to capture, I was struck once more, and my sphere missed its mark. Taking cover, I allowed my shield time to recharge, before closing the distance and finally landing a pal sphere. Unfortunately, the Tombat was far too stubborn, and as it broke free for a second time, it landed another air cannon. Knowing one more attack would spell my end, I had no choice but to retreat, as Rushboar gave the last of its strength to aid in my escape. As dawn broke on the 5th day, I managed to reach a travel point, returning to base to heal my rush boar, repair my armor, add Eiktherdeer to my party, and apply my recent stat points into health. Following my near-death experience, I decided a day at base would be a nice change of pace. I tasked Kativa with building our first crusher, deployed my rescued Arsox to the workforce, built a second berry plantation, placed several additional pal beds, and constructed a furnace we could use to smelt ore into ingots. I then spent the remaining daylight abusing my rush boar, forcing it to repeatedly run headfirst into the base's mini ore nodes. With the base's ore collected, I departed my homestead, deciding it was time for round 2 with Tombat, and it wasn't long before I spotted my target. With Eikthyr by my side, I was feeling confident. Using my bow to provide support, I relied on Eikthyr to apply most of the damage, and while Tombat did manage to strike me with an air cannon, its follow-up attacks were easily evaded. Before long, Tombat's health began to falter. Hoping to end the fight quickly, I closed the distance and deployed my first Pal Sphere, though it did not hold for long. And as I was struck with another air cannon, my third sphere made contact, and the battle came to a close. I had finally captured my first Tombat. Victorious, I continued to hunt pals through what remained of the 5th night, catching my first several hoot crates, as well as another Depresso, reaching level 12 just as the sun began to rise on day 6. Returning to base the next morning, I repaired my armor, placed another stat point into health, and decided it was time to take on my first world boss, who also happened to be my neighbor. After landing a few shots from my bow, it seemed I had its attention. Unfortunately, as I tried to deploy Eikthyr, Chillet lashed out with its dragon cannon, taking down my shield and pushing me back across the bridge. As my shield returned, Chillet seemingly lost interest in our battle, but I wasn't going to let it off the hook that easily. Pushing forward, I took a strategic position on the high ground, releasing arrows into the ice dragon as Eikthyr proved its worth once more. With Chillet's health falling, I closed the distance and took aim with a Pal Sphere, hitting my mark as I avoided a barrage of Chillet's ice missiles. Fortunately for me, this Chillet was far less stubborn than the Tombats, and victory was mine. Following my victory against Chillet, I engaged 2 Tanzis, which admittedly gave me a bit more trouble than the Alpha Chillet did. Moments later, I came across a great early game pal, the Dire Howl. After a grueling 6 Pal Spheres, the Dire Howl was captured, and I decided to head back to base. Safely back on the mountaintop, I further expanded my base foundation and constructed a hot spring for my hard-working pals, complete with a gorgeous mountaintop view. With the hot spring finished, I deployed Tombat to the workforce and spent the rest of day 6 working around the base, providing various tasks to my pal workforce and abusing my rush boar for more precious ore. Base productivity was looking good. Tombat and Depresso's willingness to work through the night was incredibly helpful, and I don't know about you, but I think Depresso is really enjoying himself. I spent what was left on the 6th night crafting nails alongside my pals, wondering what adventures day 7 would hold as the sun crept over the horizon. Day 7 began with a terrible realization. It seemed something was horribly wrong with Depresso and it was too upset to work. Totally surprised by this unexpected behavior, I decided to show Depresso our relaxing hot spring. Tossing Depresso into the hot spring seemed to do the trick as his sanity slowly began to recover. As he lay face down in the hot spring, I wasn't sure if I should be worried or not, but eventually shrugged it off and assumed he'd be alright. As Depresso relaxed, I tasked my pals with constructing a high-quality workbench, a medieval medicine workbench, and I obtained my 13th level while sorting some materials. After placing a 10th stat point into health, I briefly left the base to go check on my neighbor. Chillet wasn't too happy to see me, so I figured it could take that up with my deer. Of course, the deer once again easily dominated the battle, and after a couple of Pal Spheres, I captured my second Chillet, boasting both Diet Lover and Logging Foreman. Returning over the bridge, I headed back into the base, where I worked with Kativa to craft a Dire Howl saddle. Excited to try out the new Dire Howl harness, I traveled to Grassy Behemoth Hills, where I'd collect an effigy and hunt a few pals, including pingulets, foxsparks, gumas, and chickapees. Dire Howl's impressive speed served to make hunting far more efficient, and I gained my 14th level mounted on Wolfback. Continuing my hunt, I managed to bag a ferocious foxsparks, a third Vixie, and my first Fwack, before arriving at a small settlement just west of my base. Offering a bit of commerce, the settlement housed a POW merchant and a wandering merchant with a wide variety of useful items. As the sun set, I traveled back to base and spent the 7th night tending to my resources and gear, retrieving items from my ranch, repairing my damaged armor, and building a cooler box for food storage. As the sun rose on the 8th day, Kativa and I completed an exciting project, the Foxsparks Harness. This fun little item would allow me to use my new ferocious Foxsparks as a makeshift flamethrower, which, don't worry, the Foxparks enjoys this just as much as I do. With my new harness complete, I threw another stat point into health and spent the early hours of the morning bashing my rush boar's head against more metal rocks. With my ore gathered, I placed a third Vixie in my ranch and began constructing a sphere workbench. Once the workbench was complete, I upgraded my base to level 10 and could now start a second base. Though I already had a spot in mind and I'd need to be a bit stronger before making that journey. After crafting a few megaspheres with Kativa, it was time to once again greet my neighbor. And following some forceful negotiations, the Chillet decided to join my growing collection. As I made my way back to base, I noticed a Nightwing in the valley below. In need of a flying mount, I descended into the valley, where I was promptly greeted by an air cannon. Deploying Aetherdeer, I watched as it made quick work of the Nightwing, allowing me to capture it with a freshly crafted Megasphere. With Megaspheres in hand, I was now capable of tackling much larger prey, and after the successful capture of a few more Aetherdeer, I reached my 15th level. From there, I caught my 8th Thiefant before making my way to a local travel point and returning to base. I spent the rest of my daylight hours managing my base and gathering resources. I assigned various tasks to my pals, crafted a metal axe, gathered more wood, abused my rush boar, and placed another stat point into health. As the sun began to set, I noticed Depresso was once again too upset to work. Though I guess things weren't too bad, because after mere seconds in the hot spring, it was willing to resume its job. Following Depresso's little episode, I continued my work around the base before setting across the bridge that night with my logging foreman Chillet. After gathering a bit of wood, the two of us came across a wild Tombat, though it proved no match for the Chillet and found my Megaspheres much harder to resist. From there, I caught a couple more Hoot Crates and returned to the mountaintop base just before dawn. On the morning of day 9, I gathered ore, put Kativa to work on more Megaspheres, and departed the base to experiment with my new Foxparks harness, which resulted in me defeating and capturing Chillet in record time. Returning to base, I repaired my gear, crafted a 3-shot bow, and noticed that Depresso was once again too upset to work. Taking Depresso to the hot spring, I assumed it would be business as usual. However, Depresso somehow managed to levitate several feet above the hot spring. Now, this situation was quite bizarre, but for the first time, I was actually able to see Depresso smile, making it much easier to forgive its constant mood swings. With my pals back to work, my next goal was crafting the Nightwing saddle, though I was 4 leather short, so I traveled to the small settlement to make my first purchase. With my leather in hand, I decided to do a bit of POW hunting before returning home, and after catching a 4th Vixie, I obtained my 16th level. Continuing the hunt, I caught my first 2 Crimis, and eventually came across another Syndicate stronghold, where I took on the Syndicate scum, captured another Direhowl, and rescued my first Dazzy. Departing the stronghold, I journeyed onward, fighting for my life against an aggressive Tanzee, catching my first 2 Jolt Hogs, as well as my first Leaspunk who was traveling alongside the Syndicate trash. During the last hours of day 9, I discovered a skill fruit tree and ambushed 2 unsuspecting Direhowls with my trusty Foxparks. And though I did manage to catch both Direhowls, the second was notably more stubborn, though in the end, it was well worth the effort, as this Direhowl had the runner passive, increasing its movement speed and making it an ideal early game ground mount. As the sun set, I picked up another effigy, unlocked a new travel point, and returned to base. With Tombat and Depresso working through the night, our stone reserves were looking good, and thanks to our new logging site, my days of chopping wood seemed to be coming to an end. After putting my recent stat point into carry weight, I spent the rest of the night managing our growing reserves of resources. On the dawn of day 10, I repaired my gear, added Nightwing to my party, and tasked Kativa with making the Nightwing saddle. While waiting for the saddle's completion, I set out to greet my neighbor. And after some gentle persuasion, I captured my 5th Chillet and advanced to level 17. Returning to base, I spent some quality time with Rushboar before departing on Nightwing. It was finally time to take to the skies. After catching a few Pingulets with the help of Nightwing, I traveled west to the ravine entrance, where I encountered and captured my first and second Woollypops. As the sun set on day 10, I engaged a few Kelsies in what I thought would be an easy battle, but things quickly went downhill. After several failed catch attempts, both my health and Nightwing's health were cut in half. Dismounting Nightwing to draw the Kelpsie's fire away, I attempted to gain the high ground against our foes. But before long, Nightwing was critically wounded. I was on the defensive, connecting with a Megasphere. I was finally able to capture my first Kelpsie. Unfortunately, the second Kelpsie was far too stubborn and was eventually KO'd by my Eikthyr. Thankful to still be alive, I reached a fast travel point and returned to base. Back at the homestead, I spent what remained of the 10th night constructing a viewing cage which would allow me to instantly revive any fallen pals, though I would still have to wait for their health to recover naturally. Day 11 started with disappointment, as I wanted to build a cooking pot but lacked the necessary flame organs. The disappointment only grew heavier as I tasked Kativa with crafting a meat cleaver, hoping its consciousness wouldn't get the better of it. With my cleaver in hand, I bid farewell to a few of my less fortunate foxsparks, and I did what I had to do to survive, harvesting their bodies for flame organs. Relating to Depresso now more than ever before, we worked together to craft our cooking pot, but the worst was yet to come. I desperately needed a better body shield, but lacked the ancient civilization parts. That's right. It was time to say goodbye to a few chillets. To be honest, I was never mentally the same after this. With that, I began crafting my new Mega Shield, taking solace in the fact that even in death, my chillets would still protect me. After the embarrassingly difficult battle against two Kelpsies, I knew I had to upgrade my gear by any means necessary. Fortunately, one of the chests I had recently looted contained a schematic for an uncommon quality crossbow. With Kativa on the crossbow, I went out to pick up our first replacement chillet, though I'm afraid this chillet turned out to be rather aggressive and had to be put down. After a day of ruthlessly slaughtering the very pals I provided for, I allowed Depresso to retire, as what it had witnessed would surely decline its mental health further. And from there, I traveled to the small settlement to sell a few precious items, including some valuable chillet pelts, allowing me to pick up a few wheat seeds to improve the quality of food for my pals. After all, I'm not a monster. Shortly after returning home, Kativa and I finished production of the new crossbow, and I got to work on the pelt armor. With my improved shield, pelt armor, and uncommon crossbow, I was finally well equipped for my current level. The rest of the evening was spent mining ore, placing a wheat plantation, and constructing a mill to process my wheat into flour. After making a few more arrows for the new crossbow, I took to the sky on Nightwing and departed the base. Day 12 started strong. Catching various pals and slaying syndicate members had me feeling confident, and after a flawless pal hunting streak, I gained my 18th level. I was feeling untouchable. Placing another stat point into health, I was blissfully unaware of the reality check heading my way. It was at this point I encountered two Malpacas, a pal I had yet to capture. Mounting Nightwing, I went on the offensive, and it didn't take long for the Malpacas to retaliate. Even with critically low health, the first Malpaca managed to break out of my spheres and counter with a powerful air cannon. Hoping to evade the attacks from further away, I was then struck with two consecutive air cannons. I bailed from Nightwing, deploying my parachute, and only narrowly avoided the attack that should have ended my life. Touching down, I made my escape, while Nightwing finished off the two aggressive Malpacas. Recalling Nightwing, I reflected on the battle as a valuable lesson. The tide of battle can turn quickly, and being mounted can sometimes bring a horrible disadvantage. Of course, almost dying also served to remind me how much I hated Gumos, so I took out a few of the vermin as I regained my health. As I captured one of the last Gumos, I climbed atop the Palsphere and catapulted myself skyward, setting a course for home. Thankful to still be alive, I reached a fast travel point and returned to base. Safely back in my domain, I mounted Direhow, caught my 6th chillet, collected more Palspheres, repaired my gear, and departed once more for the ravine entrance. This time on the hunt for a very special pal. From here, I would embark north on my first multi-day pal hunt, gaining my 19th level catching Direhows. I then continued to catch several Mazarinas and a few more Thwacks. After unlocking a travel point and picking up a few effigies, I stumbled upon the pal I'd been seeking. As the sun set on the 12th day, I stared down a couple of sleeping Galeclaws, a pal that was absolutely essential to my mid to late game survival strategy. With my trusty Foxsparks in hand, the sleeping Galeclaw was met with a wall of flame and a Megasphere before it had any time to react, and thus was captured with ease. Throughout the night, I journeyed onward, catching a second Arsox, my first Univolt, more Depressos, and a Hoot Crate before taking a short break to apply another stat point into health. Not long after, I found myself facing off with a pal I was desperate to capture, Loot Moon. These bipedal nightmares were impressively good at crafting, and thanks to their dark typing, did not require sleep. After a long battle and 3 megaspheres, my target finally chose to submit, and I shifted my focus to Cognito as the night came to a close. As daylight broke on the 13th day, I managed to catch my first Cognito, pushing me into level 20. But the hunt was far from over, and I spent the morning catching my first few Sui, followed by several Lift Monks and Krimis, as well as uncovering treasures, skill fruits, and effigies along the way. I evaded frustrated Gale Claws, defeated Syndicate Hunters, rescued a captive Dazzy, reached level 21, and soared the mountain peaks of the Bamboo Grove, where I finally encountered and captured my first lucky pal of the playthrough, an adorably large Sui. After a long period of not giving myself proper time to heal, things did get a little too close for comfort. So I decided to head down from the mountaintop while my health regenerated. Descending the mountainside, I heard gunshots in the distance, and along the shoreline, I discovered Syndicate thugs engaged in battle with Dumuds. After letting them fight one another, I poached my first Dumud from the battle and proceeded to remove the witnesses from the area. Following the cleanup, I traveled along the coastline, catching a variety of pals, including my first Toko Toko, my first several Celeray, a few Pingolets, and Tanzee, before completing my PAL deck entry for Tiefens. As the sun set, I took on an Alpha Nightwing. Playing it safe with my damaged armor, I decided to go for a knockout instead of pushing to capture it. From there, I proceeded north to a small island, catching my first Capridy and reaching level 22. Under the cover of darkness, I spent the rest of night 13 ambushing pals, capturing my first Ribbunnies, a few Depressos, Tanzees, and my first pair of Dinosaurs. I can still hear their screams sometimes. As the darkness pulled back and the 14th day began, I came across a rather weak Alpha Dumud, and following an easy battle, the Dumud was captured. Finally reaching a fast travel point, I was about to return home for the first time in days when I realized I was 1 level away from unlocking the metal armor and the Gale Claw gloves. Traveling to Investigator's Fork, I engaged in some risky behavior against a Sweepa and his Sui. With my tethered armor unable to lower incoming damage, I took to the high ground hoping for an advantage when suddenly the Sweepa landed a devastating blow, which was quickly followed by a secondary strike from a supporting Sui. Retreating through the tree line, I narrowly escaped the Sweepa's wrath, deciding to hunt some easier prey. And as fate would have it, what do I find? A disgusting little Gumoss. Why is it that every time I'm on the verge of death, this little mud ball has to show up and remind me of my struggles? After catching the Gumoss, I only needed one more pal, and then I was blessed with a lone Sui. With no Sweepa to protect it, the Sui was easily captured, and I gained my 23rd level. Beaten and bruised, I returned to my base for the first time in days, finally unlocking the metal armor and the Gale Claw gloves. Eager to improve my gear, I tasked Liftmonk with crafting my metal armor and revived my Nightwing from the viewing cage. Just as I settled into mine ore, I received a notice that the base was being raided by a herd of violent pals. Though, unlike our previous raid, this raid was no false alarm. As the raiders approached, I deployed Nightwing, and the first battle for my base commenced. The raiders never stood a chance, as they were completely overwhelmed, failing to push through the base's main defensive line. Attempting to catch one of the raiders, I began blindly lobbing pal spheres into the fray until one was struck, and as the rest of the pals perished, one was captured. The only raider to survive was now a prisoner of war. I spent the rest of the evening giving Rushbore concussion, and as the sun set, I donned my fresh set of metal armor, captured my adorable neighbor, completed my metal helmet, and put all 4 of my new stat points into health. With our first raid penetrating the base interior, I decided it was time to upgrade our wood foundation to stone, and after retrieving my Gale Claw gloves, the long process of disassembling and reassembling was in full swing. Fortunately, I had my newly acquired loot moons to help me rebuild, while the rest of the pals slept and got their rest. My pals awoke on the 15th morning to find the base more fortified, but there was still work to be done. I spent most of my daylight hours mining and continued to improve base efficiency. Later in the afternoon, I received a surprise visit from my neighborhood Chillet. Unfortunately, the Chillet overstayed its welcome and was politely asked to leave. Following Chillet's sudden eviction, I decided it was time for my next big challenge. Equipped with my metal armor, Gale Claw gloves, and uncommon crossbow, I now had everything I needed to safely take on my first tower boss. I was ready to face Zoe and Grisbolt. As Grisbolt focused on my pals, I did my best to land critical strikes on Zoe, and thanks to my Gale Claw gloves, I was able to evade Grisbolt's attacks with ease, as it wasted time trying to close the distance. Meanwhile, Foxsparks continued to control the fight by applying burn damage, slowly chipping away at Grisbolt's health. Looking to give Foxsparks a break, I deployed Dire Howl, landing a critical shot on Zoe, and narrowly avoided Grisbolt's lightning streak. After a mere 3 minutes of fighting, Grisbolt's health was already critically low. Though, to be fair, I was a bit over-leveled and over-prepared for this battle. In just under 4 minutes, Grisbolt was defeated without landing a single attack on me, mostly thanks to my Gale Claw. Departing the Syndicate Tower, my next destination was the sealed realm of the Frozen Wing, where I would take on Pin King. Opening with Huggy Fire, I eliminated the minor Pingulets, and with no minor pals to back it up, the Pin King quickly fell to my Megaspheres, and I was finally starting to assemble the pals I would need for my second base. What remained of the 15th night was spent collecting effigies and completing my pal deck entry for Pingulet, returning to base just before dawn. Back at base, my pals were hard at work, and after ensuring they had plenty of food, I tasked Loop Moon with crafting my next tier of pal spheres, known as Gigaspheres. Looking through my pal box, I noticed a Dire Howl with the Swift passive, and added it to my party to start increasing its level. After crafting a feed bag and a Mega Grappling Gun, I returned to the Great Outdoors, traveling to Bamboo Grove to hunt pals and gain more experience. I caught a few Dire Howls, some Swee, and battled my first Broncherry, capturing the large pal with the help of my new Gigaspheres and reaching my 24th level. After placing my recent stat point into carry weight, I continued my hunt, catching Liftmonks, more Broncherries, Arsocs, and Univolts. Throughout the night, I ambushed a variety of sleeping pals, bagging several more Univolts, catching my first Relaxaurus, and a few Ribbunnies before encountering a herd of Dark Pals capable of fighting back. Thankfully, this led to me catching another valuable Loop Moon, and I was able to close out the night catching a couple more Cognitos. As the sun rose on day 17, I returned to base, gathered my resources, and tasked my pals with more assignments. After repairing the gear damaged in last night's hunt, I traveled to the small settlement where I purchased wool, electric organs, and bones. Returning home, I gathered more ore, and made sure my pals had plenty of assignments. With my pals hard at work, I continued upgrading my base foundation to stone, placed a few fluffy pal beds, and welcomed Broncherry to the workforce. Following that, I paid a visit to my adorable blue neighbor. Upon capturing my 10th Chillet, I received another level increase and promptly placed yet another stat point into health. After a hard day of work, I had stashed nearly 80 Gigaspheres and was ready to set out on the hunt once more. Returning to the ravine entrance, I was immediately ambushed by 2 aggressive Vanworms. After taking down the first, I was safe to focus on the second, and I managed to capture my first Vanworm. Enjoying the swift speed of my new Dire Howl, I captured another Mausarena and a few Celeray, spending what remained of the 17th night hunting along the lake shore, taking advantage of the sleeping water pals. On the dawn of the 18th day, I decided to challenge the Alpha Azarobi residing in the lake's center. Throughout the battle, I relied on my pals to deal damage while focused on evasion. Despite the Azarobi's range, keeping my distance and utilizing my Gale Claw gave it limited options. And within a few short minutes, my first Azarobi had been captured. Departing the lake, I caught a few more pals before taking on another Syndicate stronghold. After taking down the Syndicate, I rescued my first Fuddler, collected an effigy, and captured my 10th Dire Howl. From there, I proceeded further north and entered a new region housing various pals I had yet to capture. It was here that I captured my first Floppy and my first few Bristlas, bringing my level to 26 and motivating me to continue the hunt, encountering and capturing my first Cinnamoth. Journeying further north, I captured various pals, encountered a group called the Free Pal Alliance, and unlocked a new travel point before reaching the ancient ritual site. As the day carried on, the battles intensified, and after finding another effigy and snagging a few Gale Claws, I was pushed to fall back as my armor was damaged. It was time to make my way to a travel point. After catching yet another Gale Claw and picking up some treasure, I arrived at the Moonless Shore. Discovering a fast travel point as the sun set, I returned to base. Once safely home, I put another stat point into health, repaired my gear, gathered various resources and supplies, and spent the rest of the night collecting ore and gathering resources. The following morning, I placed another wheat plantation, and I was off to greet my neighbor, catching both a Capritty and the Alpha Chillet. With Chillet captured, I set out to challenge a New World boss, traveling west of the small settlement I intended to capture my first King P.A.K.A. Unfortunately, my current arsenal was mostly ineffective against King P.A.K.A., so I had to rely on my pals. And though Nightwing fell in the battle, Direhowl managed to pick up the slack, allowing me to capture the powerful world boss. Before heading back to base, I caught a couple of pals, including my first Sparkit. The rest of day 19 was split between the base and the small settlement, as I gathered resources, assigned tasks, and purchased a few electric organs and flame organs. By sunset, I constructed my first power generator and PAL condenser, before reviving Nightwing and once again mining ore throughout the evening. As the sun rose on day 20, I tasked Arsox with smelting ore and ventured across the bridge, catching a couple of Aether deer before adding another Chillet to my growing collection. With my morning ritual complete, I was off to the Bamboo Grove, where I caught another Relaxaurus and reached my 27th level. Although the day was off to a fine start, I would soon be reminded just how dangerous this world could be. After capturing a few more pals, I was ambushed by a pair of Vanworms. A steady volley of attacks managed to damage my armor, pressuring me to fall back and play the battle defensively. With the first Vanworm's health low, I attempted a capture, but it was KO'd. Shifting my target to the second Vanworm, my sphere was rejected, and although I managed to avoid 2 follow-up attacks, the third hit its mark, and I was forced to flee. Now, the wise thing to do here would have been to return to base and repair my armor. My decision to not trust that instinct would bring me the closest to death I've been on this journey so far. With my health only half recovered, I made the mistake of thinking a lone Relaxaurus would be easy prey. Unfortunately, the Relaxaurus dodged Direhowl's fierce Fang attack, causing my follow-up sphere to fail and its Dragon Burst to connect, leaving me with a mere 44 health. Kicking myself for taking the unnecessary risk, I fled the battle, narrowly escaping with my life. With a safe amount of distance between the Relaxaurus and I swiftly added another stat point into my health. More thankful than ever to reach a fast travel point, I was done taking risks for the day and returned home to base, repairing my armor and thanking whatever gods watched over this island. I spent the rest of day 20 working safely in my base, queuing up more cement, nails, and jam-filled buns. As the sun set, my pals and I worked together to construct a sphere assembly line, and I spent the rest of the evening mining ore. On day 21, I constructed a second wheat plantation and made sure my pals had plenty of tasks. With that, I returned to the ravine with the hopes of catching a better flying mount. After managing to catch 2 more Vanworms, I continued hunting a variety of pals for experience, eventually stumbling upon yet another fierce pair of Vanworms. After a grueling battle, one was KO'd and the other was captured. Thankfully, the battle was well worth the trouble, as the second Vanworm had the runner passive. As I recovered from the battle, I mined a bit more ore and picked up another effigy. With night approaching, I caught my first couple of Serpents before heading back to base to repair my damaged gear. Once the repairs were complete, I spent the rest of the evening managing my base and my resources. The 22nd morning started off with my typical routine, and after greeting my neighbor, I mined a bit of ore, added the runner Vanworm to my party, and traveled to the sealed realm of the Thunder Dragon to hunt a few Relaxaurus, reaching level 28 in the process. Later in the day, I snatched up some wandering Ribbunnies and came across the second lucky pal of my journey, which to my dismay turned out to be nothing more than a lucky Lamball. Following the catch of my so-called lucky pal, I caught another Relaxaurus before reaching a new fast travel point and returning home for the evening. Back at base, I placed another stat point into health, built my first production assembly line, and spent the remainder of the night constructing a Giga Shield with the help of my loot moons. As the sun rose on day 23, I added another Chillet to my collection before completing some tasks around the base. And with some help from Tanz, I finally completed my Vanworm saddle. With a faster and stronger flying mount in my grasp, I was finally ready for the next phase of my plan. It was time to head further north and establish my second base. En route to my destination, I picked up several effigies, treasure chests, and unlocked new fast travel points. After a long day of traveling through the skies, I reached a travel point closest to my target destination. From there, I returned to base, grabbed the materials I needed to make a second PAL box, and spent the rest of the night taking stock of my inventory. Tomorrow was going to be a big day. On the dawn of day 24, I once again took to the sky on Vanworm, closing in on my new homestead. Expecting some resistance, I dropped down from my mount and descended onto the mountaintop, discovering it was occupied by 2 Gorurats. Deploying my favorite punching bag, I relied on Nightwing to deal damage while Galeclaw helped me evade the aggressive primates. With the first Gorurat weakened, I deployed a Gigasphere, successfully capturing it as Nightwing's health began to falter. Swapping to Dire Howl, the wolf was able to quickly take control of the battle, and with the pitch of another Gigasphere, the coal-rich mountaintop was secure. I then placed my second POW box and spent the rest of the morning establishing my new mining operation. I deployed a few builders, constructed POW beds, hot springs, storage chests, and a feed box along with a berry plantation to keep the POWs fed. After providing some jam-filled buns for the workforce, I briefly returned to my first base, where I crafted a grappling gun and commissioned my first 50 hyperspheres. By nightfall, the mining base was operational with Tombats working around the clock, occasionally taking breaks in the hot springs. Of course, the operation was far from perfect, as I still needed to acquire better transporters, as well as a few pals with at least level 3 mining to automate the coal harvesting. After mining a bit of coal myself, I caught another Pin King for the new base, reaching level 29, and capped off my night by catching a few more Tombats and Hoot Crates. As day 25 kicked off, I caught my first Melpaca, and with the new mining base operational, I spent the rest of the day hunting, catching several Jolt Hogs, Dire Howls, Melpacas, Vixies, Rush Boars, Caprides, Crimis, Dinossums, and Sparkets before finally reaching level 30. I was so in the zone that I even managed to catch a human. Hooray! In between POW catches, I also managed to find several effigies, and after working up quite an appetite, I returned to base to prepare dinner. Back at base, I put 2 more stat points into health, and spent what remained of the 25th night gathering resources between my 2 bases. The next morning, I returned to my primary base loaded with precious ore and coal. After depositing my goods, I tasked Arsox with producing more ingots and charcoal, before taking a brief trip out to catch another Eiktherdeer, Crimis, and you guessed it, Chillet. Back at base, food production was looking good. With plenty of jam-filled buns stockpiled for my pals, it was time to start preparing better food for myself. Granting a 10% boost in defense, herb-roasted lamb ball was at the top of my list. Of course, I had plenty of berries on hand, so I spent the rest of the afternoon slaughtering countless lamb balls. I even came across another lucky lamb ball, and couldn't help but wonder if it tasted better than the others. With my hunger sated, I spent the rest of the evening capturing pals, reaching level 31 before the night came to a close. Returning to base on the dawn of day 27, I organized my inventory, went to wake up my neighbor, and with my health pool finally at 3,000, I applied my first point into stamina. The remainder of day 27 would be spent between my 2 current bases, where I mostly mined ore and coal, prepared cooked meals, and added a couple of stone pits to the second mining base. That night, Loot Moon and I worked together to craft a Kingpaca saddle and my first set of heat-resistant armor, as I would soon venture into biomes with a much deadlier climate. As day 28 began, it was time for a trial run with my new armor, so I grabbed some herb-roasted lamb ball and ventured out to catch another Kingpaca, managing to complete my POW deck entries for both Sparket and Melpaca on the way. Thanks to the constant burn damage from Vanworm, the Kingpaca fight was cut shorter than usual, and the king was captured without much trouble. Following the successful battle, I captured another Capridy and returned to base. With plans to visit a new biome the next day, I spent most of my daylight hours stocking up on resources and PAL spheres, while my night hours were spent gaining a bit more XP, completing my PAL deck entry for Daydream and collecting effigies. As the sun rose on day 29, I returned to my mountaintop base, and after making sure my pals had plenty of food, it was finally time to depart, setting course for a new biome in hopes of catching a particularly useful pal. It wasn't long before I arrived on the outskirts of the Twilight Dunes, catching a lone Dumud. Heading into the dunes, I was surprised to see they were full of life, and after battling a Syndicate stronghold and rescuing a Floppy, I traveled further north and captured my first Hangyu. Venturing deeper into the desert biome, I came across the pal I was seeking, my soon-to-be replacement for the overworked and slightly abused Rush Boar, Digtoise. After a quick battle, I managed to capture the Digtoise without much trouble, and from there I spent the rest of the day hunting in the dunes. managing to catch several more Dictois, achieving level 32, and catching a few more Muds, Toko and Univolts, before heading southwest and returning home. That evening, Loop Moon and I constructed the Digtois headband, an item that would allow a Digtois in my party to mine with great efficiency. I then selected the most suitable Digtois I had captured, and the brain damage Rushboar was finally able to retire. Deploying my Digtois on day 30 was a game changer. Unlike Rushboar, my presence wasn't required for Digtois to work, and I'd be free to focus on other priorities. I started construction on a high-quality hot spring, a weapon assembly line, and relocated my production assembly line. Then, with the help of my Loop Moons, I built something truly beautiful. My first firearm, the musket, just like the Founding Fathers intended. With that, I placed my second stat point into stamina and ventured off to base 2, deploying Digtois to start mining while I dropped off some better quality food at the base's feed box. I then joined in the mining effort and spent the rest of the evening collecting ore and coal. Later that night, I returned to my home base to find Tombat enjoying the new hot spring. The expression on its face almost made me feel as good as forcing our socks to smelt all these ingots did. Life was good. Day 31 started with my normal routine, before I suddenly found myself daydreaming about guns and wanting more of them. Though I knew this would require more high-quality pal oil, a difficult resource to farm at my current level, but not a difficult one to buy if you know where to look. It was time to journey to Fisherman's Point. Departing the base, I began my journey west, catching pals, collecting effigies, finding treasures, unlocking fast travel points, and mining a bit of sulfur along the way. As I reached the southern coast of Mount Obsidian, I made sure to avoid the shoreline as the pals in this region would likely crush me into a fine paste. Arriving at Fisherman's Point, I paid a visit to the Wandering Trader and acquired the pal oil I had come for. I then unlocked the town's fast travel point, grabbed an effigy, and headed home. Back at base, we assembled a makeshift handgun and a bit more ammo. As darkness fell, a group of raiders descended on the base, giving me the perfect opportunity to exercise my Second Amendment rights. And amidst the battle, I was able to capture my first Incineram. With the base and my rights protected, I spent the rest of the night collecting ore from the nearby desolate church. Ore production was looking good, and on day 32, I made my second batch of hyperspheres. Following that, I tended to my growing collection of chillets, and then decided to travel back to the dunes to hunt more of the desert pals. Approaching the dunes, I was greeted with a sight to behold. Two Memoris battling for territory. After allowing them to battle amongst themselves, I moved in to capture the victor, when I was suddenly ambushed by an aggressive pack of dire howls. Thankfully, I was able to fend them off and capture my first Mamorist. With that, I spent the rest of the day hunting pals, catching my first Sweepa, taking on the Syndicate, rescuing a Nox, and catching a few Muds, Digtois, and Toko, reaching level 33. As the sun fell lower on the horizon, I had no choice but to abandon the dunes, as without cold-resistant armor, I would surely freeze to death. Heading south into Bamboo Grove, I put another stat point into stamina, and spent the rest of the night catching Sweepa, finding effigies, and raiding a Syndicate stronghold. On the dawn of day 33, the Syndicate stronghold was defeated, allowing me to rescue a Bristla. I then began my journey back into the dunes, catching both Sweepa and Sui along the way. Returning to the dunes, I proceeded to catch Hangyus, Toko, Muds, Fuddlers, and Digtois, before coming across an interesting cliffside dungeon. Entering the Ravine Grotto dungeon, I came across and captured my first Mao, before deciding to remain in the dungeon hunting these new and rather uncommon pals. After catching a Nox, several Fuddlers, and more Maus, I obtained my 34th level. I placed another stat point into stamina, patrolling the dungeon through the night, catching several Fuddlers and a few more Nox, but struggling to find more Mao as the night burned away. On the dawn of day 34, I finally came across more Maus, and it wasn't long before I caught my 10th. Satisfied, I made my way to the dungeon boss, which turned out to be an Alpha Nox. After a surprise shot from my musket and some damage from Vanworm, the Nox was captured, allowing me to finally return to the light of day. Heading back home, I caught a few more Sweepa, rescued a Serpent, and reached a fast travel point, returning home for the first time in several days. Back at base, I put Digtois on mining duty, stashed my dungeon loot, claimed over 30 more herb-roasted lamball, and built my first improved furnace. I had officially entered the refined ingot age and was now able able to use the coal I'd been collecting for the past several days. I tasked Arsox with smelting 200 refined ingots before replacing the Vixies in my ranch with Mals. Base productivity was looking good, and with refined ingots on the way, it wouldn't be long before I'd make my next major advancements. That evening, I relocated the sphere assembly line and placed a large toolbox to increase crafting efficiency. I then tasked my loot moons with polymer, gigaspheres, and plenty of ammunition. After whipping up a bit of breakfast, I started day 35 by traveling out to Fisherman's Point, purchasing another 50 pal oil, and then visiting the small settlement to pick up electric organs. Returning home, I commissioned a refined pickaxe, picked up some gold from the Mals, made a few shock grenades, and headed off to Base 2 to assign more dictoists to the mining operation. After collecting more coal and ore, I returned home to craft a flame cauldron, further increasing our ingot production. After queuing up more ingots, it was finally time to make my cold-resistant armor, as tomorrow I plan to travel into the icy north to get an early start on quartz. With my armor complete, I provided my loot moons with a few more tasks, and spent the rest of my evening mining ore, sorting chests, and moving some items around to improve storage efficiency. On day 36, I donned my cold-resistant armor and set out in search of quartz. After picking up an effigy and catching my first 2 Masandas, I ascended to the nearby peaks of Frostbound Mountain, where I collected treasures and unlocked a new fast travel point. Though I knew if I wanted to find quartz, I would have to head much further north. Setting out across the sky on Vanworm, I continued my journey. Following the capture of my 3rd Masanda, Vanworm and I arrived on the Northern Islands, where I collected my first round of quartz, looted a treasure containing a gold key, and made my way into the icy tundra. Underleveled for the region, I decided to avoid the local pals, and after unlocking another fast travel point, I proceeded to push further into the snowy mountain biome. Just before sundown, I found what I had been searching for. Deep in the northern mountains, I came across an area with an abundance of quartz. After marking the location on my map, I departed towards a distant fast travel point and returned to base. Once home, I dropped off some resources, cleared my ranch, and ventured to the bamboo grove for an evening hunt, catching my 10th sweepa and a few serpents before finally reaching level 35 just as the night came to an end. Since most of my previous day was spent traveling, I decided to spend day 37 hunting. That morning, I caught several serpents, put my 5th point into stamina, took on a syndicate stronghold, and rescued my first flambell. As the day carried on, I caught more Arsox, Galeclaw, my 10th Ribunny, a Relaxosaurus, and a couple of Univolts before heading home for the evening. Back at base, I put Digtoist to work, stashed some gold, and ordered up a few more herb-roasted lamb balls before using my recent level to unlock Ultraspheres, carbon fiber, circuit boards, and an improved sphere assembly line. I spent the rest of the night assigning tasks and preparing for the assembly of Ultraspheres, queuing up loads of carbon fiber and charcoal. Just before dawn, the sound of a lucky pow caught my attention, and I could see it shimmering in the distance. Descending from the mountaintop, I had little idea of the abomination that awaited below. As dawn broke on the 38th day, I captured my unfortunate discovery, a disgusting yet lucky Gumos. I then mounted Vanworm and ascended back up the mountain. After organizing a few resources, I decided it was time to travel to my first wildlife sanctuary. These dangerous and protected zones were well known for housing both rare pals and valuable treasures. After departing the southern shore, it wasn't long before the sanctuary was in view. Hoping to find a defense pendant or a rare weapon schematic, I began looting the treasures surrounding the sanctuary. Unfortunately, an uncommon handgun schematic was the best thing I found. Making my way into the sanctuary, I attempted to capture a rather aggressive Azarobi. Following a bit of trouble, I was able to capture the Azarobi while using the terrain as cover. Heading further into the protected region, my persistence paid off, and I found the defense pendant I had been seeking. Pleased with my good fortune, I went on to catch my first Violet and my first Eikthyrdr Terra, before being blessed with yet another defense pendant. With both pendants equipped, my defense was stronger than ever, and after a short rematch with another Azarobi, I reached my 36th level. Continuing to disturb the sanctuary's natural balance, I caught my first Elphadran and spent what remained of the 38th evening catching more Eikthyrdr, Violets, Azarobis, and Pen Kings. As day 39 kicked off, I continued my hunt within the sanctuary, eventually putting my recent stat point into health before noticing a blue beam of light emanating from where I had been moments ago. It was at this point I realized I was now dropping captured pals, which meant my PAL box was at capacity. With no other option, I was forced to return home to remedy the situation. Heading back into the mainland, I managed to pick up several effigies before finally reaching the fast travel point located in the small settlement. Back at base, I organized my PAL box, burned through most of the daylight hours condensing pals, and decided to display my glorious chillet collection. Look, I don't have a problem, okay? Alright, maybe just one more chillet, it's the last one, I promise. With a bit more space in my PAL box, I spent the rest of the evening hunting a few local pals, completing the PAL deck entries for both Hoot Crates and Tombat, before closing out the night slaughtering pingolets for PAL fluid and catching a sleeping Nox. On the dawn of day 40, I assaulted another Syndicate stronghold, rescued a captive Nox, and caught a few more Jolt Hogs, pushing me into my 37th level. A short while later, I completed my PAL deck entry for Jolt Hogs before coming across another local dungeon. Hoping to complete more PAL deck entries, I made my way into the dungeon, only to discover it was full of Kilamaris, a PAL I had yet to capture. Looking to make the most of this opportunity, I proceeded to catch 7 of these squid-like pals as well as a 10th Fuddler, before placing my recent stat point into health, taking on the dungeon boss, and returning to the great outdoors. Outside the dungeon, I came across another effigy before arriving at the small settlement to sell some pals and free up more space. After unloading a ton of dead weight, I was able to profit about 45,000 gold. With my PAL box issues finally resolved, I ventured into the small settlement's dungeon for the remainder of the night, completing my PAL deck entry for Kilamari and capturing an Alpha Dinosaur before looting some treasure and exiting the dungeon. Emerging from the dungeon on the dawn of day 41, I departed from the small settlement and returned to base. With the last several days being focused on hunting, most of day 41 would be spent catching up on base productivity. I used my recently obtained quartz to craft my first round of circuit boards, resupplied my inventory of gigaspheres and hyperspheres, and after using my recent level up to unlock a few more tech advancements, I worked alongside my loot moons to craft my first set of refined metal armor, raising my defense from 292 to 480. After tasking my pals with a few more assignments, I spent most of what remained of the 41st day mining between my 2 bases and the desolate church. With the base properly managed, I departed late in the evening to resume my quest to grow stronger, capturing another King P.A.K.A. before venturing to the Moonless Shore just before dawn. As day 42 kicked off, I added 2 new PAL entries, catching my first Catris, and shortly after, my first Robin Quill. Looking to make the most of my time in the Moonless Shore, I worked tirelessly to obtain my 10 catch bonus for the region's various PAL species, and after completing my PAL deck entries for both Cinnamoth and Bristla, I advanced to my 38th level. Pressing onward, I continued closing out my work in the Moonless Shore, completing my PAL deck entries for Floppy, Galeclaw, and even Robin Quill, managing to catch all 10 in a single day. Feeling accomplished, I returned to base as the last bit of daylight burned away. That night, I put my recent stat point into health, queued up several production tasks for my pals, and resumed the endless grind for precious resources. On the start of day 43, I put together some better beds for my pals. Shortly after completing my project, I received a surprise visit from my neighbor Chillet, who seemed interested in joining my collection. Happy to oblige, I introduced him to his new roommates. After tasking my pals with a bit more work, it was finally time to head out and place my 3rd PAL box. So I donned my cold-resistant armor and headed north. On my way to the quartz nodes I had discovered a few days prior, I used the gold key I found on day 36 and was blessed with an uncommon pump-action shotgun schematic. Following the amazing find, I placed my 3rd PAL box. I then deployed a few dig toys, constructed some chests, straw beds, and a feed box. With the necessities in place, I joined my pals in the mining efforts. As the day came to a close, I removed most of the pals from the base, only leaving a handful of dig toys behind in the frozen wasteland. Wishing them luck in the opposite of their natural habitat, I returned home, storing the quartz and iron I had collected. As the sun set, I tasked my Arsox with a few more refined ingots, and later in the night, I set out in search of more loot moons for my assembly lines. Unfortunately, the only one I found ended up dying to burn damage, but at least I found another effigy. On the 44th morning, I traveled back to Fisherman's Point to purchase a thermal undershirt and another 200 high-quality pal oil. From there, I returned to my primary base. After tasking my loot moons with converting the pal oil into polymer, I added another chillet to my growing collection and departed the base in search of more precious pal fluid, a resource I was going to need in abundance to properly stock up on ultraspheres. Heading north on Vanworm, I made my way into Gobfin territory. After catching my first Gobfin, I set upon their tribe with extreme prejudice, catching and killing indiscriminately, slaughtering what seemed to be entire families. I also found time to collect another effigy, unlock a fast travel location, and eventually completed my PAL deck entry for Gobfin. With plenty of PAL fluid on hand, I returned to base as the sun began to set. I spent the rest of the evening collecting base resources and assigning more production tasks to my pals, before eventually setting out in hopes to continue my hunt for loot moons. Arriving at the moonless shore, it wasn't long before I spotted my target, and after 3 back-to-back hyperspheres, I was hoping the catch was worth it, and it certainly was, as I had captured my first workaholic loot moon. On day 45, I reached the ancient ritual site, and from there traveled to the desolate church, gathering ore and completing my PAL deck entry for Caprides. I then returned to base, making sure my pals had plenty to work on, and decommissioning the old sphere assembly line to make way for the new and improved sphere assembly line 2. With that, my first wave of ultraspheres were commissioned. After dropping by to visit my neighborhood chillet, I traveled north to Masanda Forest, where I'd spend the rest of day 45. Catching my first B-Guard, I made sure to stay on my flying mount, as B-Guards are known for self-destructing, and I'd have to take to the skies if one got too close. After catching a couple of back-to-back Masandas, I reached level 39, and shortly after I found and caught my first Elizabeth. The rest of day 45 was a blur of PAL catches, Masandas, B-Guards, and Gorurats. By nightfall, I managed to complete my PAL deck entry for Masanda and B-Guard. As day 45 came to a close, I was blessed with another round of good luck, successfully capturing 3 more loot moons as the sun began to rise on day 46. The following morning, I found an effigy and completed my PAL deck entry for Gorurats. Following that, I picked up a couple more effigies, took on the Free PAL Alliance, unlocked a new travel point, and returned to base. Back in my domain, I gathered and organized my resources and retrieved my first batch of ultraspheres. After investing another point into health, I began working to add new crops to the primary base, building both a lettuce plantation and a tomato plantation. I then repaired my armor, imprisoned another chillet, and queued up several resources for my pals. Later that evening, I received a different kind of raid, warning me of rampaging fangirls. Of course, I knew this meant I'd be getting a visit from Lovanders, a rather disturbing pal I had yet to catch. After realizing the Lovanders spawned at the base of the mountain, I ventured to the valley below to catch some, only to find them completely ignoring me. Fixated on a cliff wall, they seemed to just accept my attacks. Or maybe they liked it. Oh god, are they into this? After managing to catch one with a hypersphere, the rest suddenly turned to flee. And I'll admit, at this exact moment, I was actually really scared. But thankfully, they continued ignoring me. As the Lovanders made their retreat, I managed to catch one more before wondering which PAL deck entries I should focus on next. To answer this question, I spent the rest of night 46 scrolling through my PAL deck, creating a list of entries I would need to complete before heading into the more challenging biomes. With my list of pals gathered, I planned to head out as soon as possible. So I started day 47 by making sure my pals would have plenty to do in my absence. And after collecting some resources from base 2, I was finally ready to depart on another multi-day hunt. After catching my 10th Dinosaur, I traveled to Bamboo Grove, where I found a skill fruit tree, effigies, another travel point, and a low-level dungeon. Heading straight for the dungeon boss, I was happy to see Fwack, and within a few short moments, I managed to check another pal off my list. Venturing back into the wild, I encountered and captured my first several rubies, allowing me to reach my 40th level by sundown. That night, I completed my PAL deck entries for Gumos and Eiktherdir, and made further progress on Nightwing, Mamorist, and Ruby. Throughout day 48, I continued to hunt and catch various pals, finding several effigies along the way and taking out several minor world bosses, including a fairly easy battle against a Gumos and a more challenging battle against Sweepa. Once the Sweepa was defeated, I set my sights on the surrounding Swee, allowing me to complete yet another PAL deck entry. From there, Digtoise and I took on my first Univolt world boss, a fight we easily won thanks to Digtoise's type advantage, and shortly after we proceeded to catch my 5th King P.A.K.A. Throughout my travels, I also completed entries for both Ruby and Serpent, before heading to the Moonless Shore, catching another Woollypop as the sun set. That night, I caught more Broncherry and Loot Moon. Only needing one more Loot Moon to complete its entry, I was blessed with the presence of a lucky Loot Moon. Things were going well until I was suddenly ambushed by another Loot Moon mid-fight. Fortunately, Vanworm made short work of the interloper, and moments later, the lucky Loot Moon was caught, and I closed out the night, catching another Cognito and Broncherry just before sunrise. On the dawn of day 49, I rescued a Dazzy from the Syndicate, before continuing to catch local pals, snagging some Mazzarina, Vanworm, Woollypop, and Broncherry. After completing my PAL deck entries for both Vanworm and Mazzarina, I achieved level 41 while catching Woollypops, and soon after completed its PAL deck entry. Though at this point, I realized I was once again dropping pals, which wasn't too surprising after hunting for nearly 3 days straight. So I traveled to the small settlement and paid a visit to the PAL merchant, selling what I could only guess to be 200 or 300 pals for a cool 64,000 gold. That evening, I returned to base, deployed Digtoise, and placed 2 more stat points into health. From there, I spent the rest of the evening sorting my inventory and managing my base. Checking over my inventory the next day, I realized I needed to restock on PAL spheres. So I spent most of day 50 working between bases. I tasked my Loot Moons with more production, spent a few technology points, and used our new crops to make some better food. Of course, I did take a quick break to add another Chillet to my collection as well as another Nightwing. Later that evening, my base was once again raided by Lovanders. Similar to their last visit, they gathered at the base of the mountain, allowing me to catch 3 more before the rest fled as the sun rose on the 51st day. Ascending back to my mountaintop base the next morning, I resumed my production efforts, visiting the desolate church to gather more ore, before tasking my workforce with more cement, gigaspheres, paldium, and hyperspheres. With that, I was finally ready to return to the field, and I had my sights set on adding a powerful electric-type pal to my team. After catching another Broncherry and completing my entries for Arsox, I arrived at my destination. Taking aim at the Beacon World boss, I open-fired before a wall of flame and lightning erupted between my Vanworm and his opponent. Mainly focusing on evasion, I kept Vanworm on the offense. Fortunately, Vanworm did not need much assistance, and after deploying a few hyperspheres, I managed to catch my first beacon. That night, I began my journey home, catching a few Cognitos before unlocking a new fast travel point and returning to base. The following morning, I ventured out once more in hopes of catching a better beacon, and without a doubt, today's opponent was far more dangerous. Vanworm was on the ropes, and while attempting to swap it out with Digtoise, the beacon took advantage of the opening. Though with Digtoise deployed, its type advantage quickly turned the battle in our favor, and I was able to capture my second beacon, its ferocious passive explaining the increased difficulty. From there, I captured another Broncherry before arriving at the sealed realm of the Winged Tyrant to take on my first Quivern. With its weakness to dragon-type moves, Vanworm struggled against the opponent, and I was forced to swap into Direhowl mid-battle. Thankfully, my wolf companion still held its own, and moments later, I was able to capture my first Quivern. Seeking a bit more of a challenge, I decided to try my luck in a more dangerous biome, and after departing Fisherman's Point, I encountered 2 high-level Incinerams. The fight proved far riskier than I had predicted, as my fiendish opponents shrugged off my spheres and bullets with ease. Thankfully, the increased mobility granted by Galeclaw kept me out of harm's way long enough for Digtoise to KO the first opponent, and before long, I managed to capture the second. With the battle won, I proceeded to explore the shoreline of Mount Obsidian, catching several Leespunks, and collecting some effigies before departing to take on another world boss. Traveling to the sealed realm of the Invincible, I faced off with Catris. Deploying Vanworm, I was immediately charged by the Catris, forcing me into evasive action. Unfortunately for Catris, focusing on me left it open to Vanworm's onslaught, resulting in an easy capture. Returning to the wild as the sun set, I continued hunting throughout the night, securing more Mammarists, Nightwings, and effigies. Day 53 started with more of the same, and after catching a few local pals, I unlocked another travel point, collected some effigies, and eventually came across a low-level Grintail world boss. Of course, it did not put up much of a fight, and I added its entry to my pal deck without much trouble. From there, I reached a travel point and returned home. After my difficult battle against the Mount Obsidian Incinerams, I decided it was once again time to increase my combat proficiency. So I added my ferocious beacon to my team, and spent most of the 53rd day improving my gear, crafting both the cold and heat-resistant refined metal armor sets, the beacon saddle, and that night, I began the long process of assembling the uncommon pump-action shotgun schematic I had found on day 43. As the sun rose on the 54th day, my new shotgun was finally complete. I then stocked up on ammunition and collected a few more resources before departing for Gobfin territory to try out my beacon saddle and collect more PAL fluid. My recently improved gear was certainly a step in the right direction, though I knew if I wanted to dominate the PALs within the Mount Obsidian biome, I was going to need a strong water type. Unfortunately, the PAL I had in mind was far too powerful for me to face head on, but with a few more electric PALs, I would have much better odds. So I decided to spend the next several days securing the strongest electric PALs I could find. After a long afternoon of slaughtering Gobfins, I returned to base, collected more minerals from base 2, and set out late that evening to catch another beacon. Thanks to my previous experience with the Thunderbird, the fight went smoothly, and beacon was captured just as the 54th night came to a close. The next morning, I continued my quest to collect stronger electric PALs as I made my way to my next target. After picking up a couple of effigies, I came across a shoreline housing a large number of kelpsies, allowing me to rapidly complete yet another PAL deck entry. Before long, I arrived at my target destination, the sealed realm of the Thunder Dragon, where I would take on my first Relaxaurus Lux. With Digtois's type advantage and the power of my newly constructed shotgun, the Thunder Dragon found itself completely outmatched, and as its health faltered, I deployed the first Ultra Sphere of this playthrough, capturing the Relaxaurus Lux and achieving my 42nd level. Returning to the wild, I took on and captured another Univolt world boss, collected a few more effigies, and used a local Statue of Power to enhance my catch rate. Unfortunately, I would have to wait until tomorrow to catch more powerful electric PALs, so from here I ventured to the Falls Mineshaft to take on Fingalope. After some impressive teamwork between my pals and I, Fingalope decided life within the sphere was the safer option. Looking to clear one last world boss for the day, I journeyed to the Shoals Mineshaft, where I encountered my first Broncherry Aqua. For the most part, the fight went smoothly, and my pals performed as expected, with the exception of Galeclaw, who was apparently having a bit of an off day. With our opponent weakened, I deployed a Hypersphere, and with that, captured my first Broncherry Aqua. Departing the mines as the sun began to set, I made my way back to base where I placed my recent stat point into carry weight, and spent my 55th night managing my base, sorting my inventory, and assigning tasks to my pal workforce. As day 56 kicked off, I gathered more ore, queued up more ingots and paldium fragments, and then set out to resume my mission, managing to defeat and capture my 4th beacon, followed by yet another Alpha Univolt. From there, I attempted to catch another King P.A.K.A., but it was abruptly put down by Vanworm. Returning to base later that evening, I queued up more tasks for my pals before using my recent level to unlock an improved production assembly line. Unfortunately, the improved assembly line was a fair bit larger than the original, which meant it wasn't going to fit in the same spot. So with that, I spent the rest of my night making renovations around the base. After building up walls and a ceiling, I relocated my Chillet collection to a more suitable location, and from there I worked to expand the bridge at my base entrance, converting it into a large stone platform extending from my forge and cooking area. The following morning, I placed my weapon assembly line, sphere assembly line, and production assembly line along the new platform before tasking my loot moons with crafting my next firearm, the single-shot rifle. My base was looking better and more fortified than ever, and before long, a group of raiders were kind enough to drop in, helping to test the new and improved structure. Knowing they would willingly give their lives just to ensure our base was secure reminded me that there was still good in this harsh and brutal world. With my work around the base finally complete, I was free to resume my hunt for electric pals, and after capturing my 2 daily targets, I journeyed to the sealed realm of the Stalwart to challenge a new opponent. The Warsec's slower movement and highly telegraphed attacks made it easy to evade, and Van Worm continued punishing our foe while I used the realm's pillars for cover. After a flawless battle, the powerful POW was captured, and I returned to the surface. Not much later, I would spot my first Hellzifer, and opted to spend what remained of Night 57 working to make progress on its PAL deck entry. Throughout the night, I managed to catch a total of 8 Hellzifers, before making my way to a travel point as the sun crept over the horizon. As Day 58 kicked off, I returned to the bamboo groves, and after securing my 6th beacon, I ventured once more to the sealed realm of the Thunder Dragon, where I battled and captured my 2nd Relaxaurus Lux. Feeling confident with my collection of powerful electric PALs, I knew I was almost ready to set my big plan into motion. Tomorrow, I would take on one of the strongest water PALs this world had to offer. Returning to base, I began my preparations, claiming my newly completed single-shot rifle and commissioning plenty of ammunition. After collecting some resources from Base 2, I ventured to my base in the northern mountains. It was here I discovered that my Digtoists were indeed not okay, with all 3 slowly starving to death. Yeah, that's my bad. Luckily, I had a few extra jam-filled buns on me, so I threw them into the feed box, and boy were they excited. Not long after dropping off the food, we were all working happily together. At least we were until the sun began to set, causing me to freeze half to death. Returning to the comfort of my primary base, I spent the rest of the night queuing up tasks, collecting resources, and repairing my gear for the big day ahead. As the sun rose on Day 59, I journeyed to my northern base for the last time. Returning the Digtoists to their POW box, I realized not a single one of them had a shred of sanity remaining, and that's okay, because they had something better, my respect. With that, it was time to decommission my POW box in the north, so it could be used in more devious affairs. I was finally ready to take on the Yormintide world boss. This opponent was far stronger than any I'd encountered so far. I didn't just think Yormintide would destroy my team, I knew it would. And that's why, instead of using a team, I was going to use an army. With the intimidating dragon in my sights, I opened fired, hoping to lure the beast into my trap. Moments later, I deployed Beacon, narrowly avoiding Yormintide's lightning with the help of Galeclaw. Unfortunately, Beacon pushed forward, preventing Yormintide's advance and forcing me to swap it for Digtoists. Little did I know, things were about to get complicated. As I failed to evade Yormintide's Dragon Blast, I was met with an unwanted notification. With my shield down, and raiders closing in on my operation, I had no choice but to fall back and assess the situation. Quickly scanning my surroundings, I realized I still had some time before the raiders would arrive. I would need to draw Yormintide in before that happened. Narrowly avoiding a direct hit, I took aim at my opponent once more before realizing Digtoist was on the verge of collapse. Recalling my POW, Yormintide set its gaze upon me, but before it could react, it was met with a barrage of lightning strikes. Deploying Van Worm, I pushed forward, making the most of our initiative. Yormintide was on the ropes, and as its health began to falter, I repositioned, hoping to find a good angle to deploy my Ultraspheres. Closing the distance, I opened fire with my shotgun, as Yormintide struggled to shake off my army of electric pals. Following a powerful discharge from Relaxaurus, I deployed my first Ultrasphere, though the Yormintide would not go down easily, breaking free of my first 2 spheres as the raiding party crossed over the horizon. Connecting with my 3rd sphere, I watched with bated breath as Van Worm held off the advancing raiders, and to my relief, my plan succeeded. With the real threat removed from the battlefield, my pals and I moved to destroy the interloping raiders, exacting a high price for their attempted interference. Victorious, I withdrew my forces, added Yormintide to my party, and proceeded to a nearby dungeon where I would catch my 10th Nox and introduce the Syndicate to the Lord of the Sea. After taking down the dungeon boss, I claimed my loot, departed the dungeon, and made my way back to base, spending what remained of the 59th night, providing more tasks to my pals, and collecting more resources with the help of Digtoists. Following a bit of mining, I started day 60 by crafting the uncommon handgun schematic I had found in the Wildlife Sanctuary. With my new weapon complete, I returned to my lakeside base in hopes of catching another Yormintide. With no unexpected interruptions from raiders, the fight went smoothly, but unfortunately, the Yormintide refused to be captured and instead chose to go out fighting. From there, I journeyed to Windswept Hills to take on the memorous world boss known as the King of the Forest. Of course, my decision to collect some ore mid-fight seemed to upset the king, which was understandable. Though despite the memorous frustration, it was simply outmatched by my PAL team, and with the throw of an Ultrasphere, the King of the Forest was mine. Feeling confident in my battle prowess, I was nearly ready to brave Mount Obsidian. Though before I departed for the next stage of my adventure, I wanted to clear out the last of the local world bosses. After capturing my first Lunaris, I snagged another Nightwing, took down an Alpha Broncherry, and as the sun set, I caught my 9th Memorist. That night, I caught another Catris before spending a good portion of the evening battling Elphadran. With yet another world boss defeated, I made my way to my next target, gathering effigies and capturing a few more minor pals along the way. On the dawn of day 61, I arrived at the sealed realm of the spirits, where I would take on my first Battalia. With its weakness to fire types, Battalia struggled against Vanworm, allowing me to capture it without much trouble. Returning to base, I took a moment to queue up some tasks for my pals and collect some more resources before departing once more to battle Yormantide. Hoping today's opponent would be less stubborn, I was exceedingly thankful when the Yormantide failed to break free of my Ultrasphere. From there, I was off to take on another world boss, arriving at the sealed realm of the Guardian to face off with Violet. Boasting a higher level, the Violet was stronger than many of the pals I had faced recently, though this did little to help it against Vanworm's type advantage and Yormantide's overwhelming power. With Violet captured, I emerged from its dungeon to discover the surrounding area to be rich with effigies, opting to spend what remained of the 61st night collecting effigies and capturing a few more pals. Continuing to explore on day 62, I caught another Catris and found yet another effigy before coming across a lucky Bristla. Despite the Bristla being rather frustrated with my aggressive tactics, the angry flower eventually conceded, and I added a new lucky pal to my growing collection. From there, I ventured to the Devout's Mineshaft, where I would take on my next target. Knowing all too well that the Bee Guards would self-destruct to defend their queen, I made sure to take them out first. With the Bee Guards vanquished, Elizabeth fought hard, but was outnumbered and outmatched, leading to another successful capture. Departing the mineshaft, I unlocked a new travel point, picked up another effigy, and proceeded to catch several local Elizabeths, eventually reaching my 43rd level. Following the successful hunt, I returned home, where I'd spend most of the day managing my base and filling production queues. That evening, I traveled to my lakeside base to take on an incredibly stubborn Yormantide, which forced me to burn through 11 Ultraspheres. But in the end, my persistence paid off, and the aggressive pal was captured. Returning home, I spent what remained of the 62nd night, gathering resources, assigning tasks, and using my recent level increase to unlock new tech advancements. As day 63 began, I tasked my pals with constructing my newly unlocked Hyper Shield, placed my recent stat point into health, and worked alongside my loot moons to complete the project. With my Hyper Shield equipped, I decided to spend the rest of the day restocking ammunition and supplies as my constant battles against the local world bosses were quickly draining my reserves. With the demand for ore increasing, I opted to avoid crafting ammo and instead focused on selling captured pals to purchase ammo from Fisherman's Point. Returning to base, I assigned more tasks to my pals and then departed to hunt the peaks of Frostbound Mountain. Shortly after arriving, I managed to catch my first Rangedrix, and not long after that, I caught my first Foxicle. With 2 new entries to complete, I decided to spend what remained of my daylight hours hunting within the snowy biome, managing to catch a total of 4 Foxicles and completing my PAL deck entry for Rangedrix. As the day came to a close, I returned home and spent the 63rd night working around the base, managing my inventory and restocking PAL spheres. Only one challenge remained before I would journey to Mount Obsidian, a challenge I plan to endure tomorrow. On the dawn of day 64, I collected the last of my base resources before departing for my final challenge. Confident in my gear, I returned to Frostbound Mountain and ventured to the Free PAL Alliance Tower, where I would take on my next pair of tower bosses, Lily and Lylene. Deploying Vanworm, I leveraged its type advantage for an early assault, and while Vanworm's flames dealt significant damage, Lylene's water attacks eventually forced me to swap it out for Yormantide. The battle raged as Yormantide clashed with the duo, but Lylene's seed mines overwhelmed it, leading to Yormantide's first knockout. With Vanworm still recovering, I deployed Digtoist to buy time, but its weakness to grass-type moves cut its time in the battle short as it was swapped for Beacon. Always eager to push a fight, Beacon performed well against the duo, but eventually met the same fate as Yormantide, falling to Lylene's seed mines. As Lylene weakened, Vanworm rejoined the fight, its flames relentless. Seizing the opportunity, I unloaded my shotgun, and together we landed the final blow. Lily and Lylene had fallen. Returning to base victorious, I revived my fallen pals, unlocked tech upgrades, and spotted raiders at the mountain's base. Taking advantage of the opportunity, I captured 2 Leespunks and my first Incineram knocked before the raiders began to flee. With victory secured, it was time for my greatest challenge yet. Donned in my heat-resistant armor, I set out for Mount Obsidian, reaching its base as the sun set. Throughout the night, I battled and captured various fire pals, claiming my first Pyron, my first Reptyro, and my first Pyron knocked, marking the end of an eventful day. On day 65, I set out to explore the island's southern side, gathering effigies, treasure chests, and collecting sulfur. Reaching the southern coast, I battled and captured my first Ragnahawk, sparking a blur of successful catches, taking on Leespunks, Ragnahawks, Fengalopes, and Incinerams before spotting a herd of bushies, a rather dangerous pal I had yet to capture. Following a bit of finesse and a mindfully safe distance, I managed to capture 2 of the dangerous pals. The hunt went smoothly until aggressive Incinerams landed some harsh blows, damaging my armor and taking a toll on my health. But in the end, they too were captured. After a brief rest, collecting more effigies, I resumed my hunt, capturing 2 more Ragnahawks and finally reaching my 44th level. As dusk fell, I secured another Bushy, Fengalope, and my first 2 Leespunk Ignis, further expanding on my PAL deck entries. Discovering a new fast travel point, I ignored my damaged armor and pressed onward. Soon I encountered a sleeping Blazehound Noct and captured it after a short fight. Moments later, I caught another Blazehound Noct before deciding not to push my luck any further. Using the nearby travel point, I returned home, spending the evening sorting through the spoils of a long but rewarding hunt. As day 66 began, I decided I needed a break from the dangers of PAL hunting and opted to spend a couple of days managing and improving my bases. I placed a stat point into health, unlocked legendary spheres, and the electric furnace. With that, the electric furnace was commissioned, and I retired my hardworking Arsocs, replacing them with the much more capable Ragnahawks. It was finally time to smelt the best ingots this world had to offer, the coveted PAL metal ingots. I then journeyed to base 2, where I deployed Reptyros and Hellziffers to the workforce. This is where the full weight of 50% resource generation set in. Despite all of my planning, I had a long way to go before I'd have enough PAL metal ingots. So I spent the rest of the day mining between bases and the Desolate Church. Working through the night, I continued managing my bases, checking in on my pals, crafting a Yormantide saddle, repairing my gear, and upgrading my food storage. On day 67, I boosted my base's power output by assigning a Relax Source Lux to the generator, and worked alongside my pals to craft my first set of legendary PAL spheres. I then had my pals assemble more Ultra Spheres and a Giga Grappling Gun, while I optimized base production by moving the feed boxes closer to the assembly lines. Once the new grappling gun was complete, I equipped all 3 variants, making resource transportation much more efficient. After mining alongside my pals, I was drawn away from the base by the call of a lucky Aetherdeer. After adding another lucky pal to my collection, I returned to base and resumed mining, before collecting ore from the Desolate Church as well. As night fell, I queued up more PAL metal ingots and continued my work throughout the night. Late in the evening, I was rudely interrupted by a raid alert, but I quickly realized my help was not needed, as the pals occupying my base were more than capable of defending themselves. After queuing up another batch of legendary spheres the following morning, I realized I was running low on cement and lacked the PAL fluid to make more, calling for me to spend the first half of my day committing various war crimes on the Gobfin tribes. Returning to base later that evening, cement production was resumed, but my appetite for violence had yet to be sated. Departing the base, I ventured to the sealed realm of the Pristine, where I would take on the Cyblix world boss. While I focused on evasion, Van Worm exploited Cyblix's weakness to fire-based attacks, and as it was met with a devastating fireball, I released an Ultra Sphere. Unfortunately, the stubborn pal wasn't ready to give up yet. Recalling Van Worm, it took several more shotgun blasts and Ultra Spheres, but in the end, the Cyblix would be mine. Late in the day, I ventured back to base, provided my pals with more tasks, and then journeyed to Fisherman's Point, where I'd spend the 68th night selling valuable pals and using the profits to load up on ammunition. With my ammo resupplied, it was time to embark on another dangerous hunt, perhaps the most dangerous hunt so far. So I cleared out my base resources, assigned plenty of tasks, and set out for Mount Obsidian once again. After testing out my Yormantide saddle while catching a Ragnahawk, I came across my first Blazehowl. Following a short battle, the stubborn pal submitted. Encountering a second Blazehowl moments later, I quickly discovered it was far more determined to remain free, landing an attack that left me burned and with low health. though despite its efforts, it too was captured. While my health recovered, I targeted less dangerous prey, snagging a few gobfin ignis. Taking a short break, I returned to base, using Battalia's Blessing of the Flower Spirit to recover my lost hit points. Returning to the field as the sun set, I was coming to appreciate just how dangerous Mount Obsidian could be, as I faced off against two powerful Ragnahawks. Wounded once more, I was forced to retreat for the first time in quite a while. Now, most Pal Tamers may have let that slide, but not me. Circling back around 1 minute later, I found both Ragnahawks fast asleep. Obliterating the first with a surprise fireball, the second somehow slept through the blast. Still injured from our last altercation, the sleeping Ragnahawk was easy prey, and with a throw of a single Pal Sphere, revenge was mine. What remained of Night 69 was spent capturing a few more Pals, and before sunrise, I was able to complete my Pal deck entry for Incineram. On the morning of day 70, I hunted across Mount Obsidian, being quickly reminded of the dangers of staying mounted during tough battles. After completing my Pal deck entry for Ragnahawk, I realized I was approaching Jet Dragon, one of the 4 legendary Pals far beyond my current capabilities. So I wisely changed course. Navigating safely around it, I continued north, capturing Pals, collecting effigies, and noting a rich ore deposit for later. My real goal in this hunt was Wildlife Sanctuary 2, home to 2 powerful Pals I sought for my team. Arriving by midday, I scouted for treasure before encountering my first target, Wumpo Boton. Though my Vanworm's fire attacks overwhelmed our foe, Wumpo still managed to damage my armor, forcing me to tread very carefully in this perilous area. Soon after, I found my second target, Yormantide Ignis. Dismounting for safety, I deployed my own Yormantide, whose water-type advantage made quick work of its fiery counterpart. A few shotgun blasts and 2 Pal Spheres later, I secured the formidable Pal. With my primary targets captured, I explored the sanctuary, collecting treasures and battling the powerful natives. However, my Yormantide proved too strong, knocking out more opponents than I was able to capture. Late into the night, I stumbled across something incredible, a sleeping level 45 Yormantide Ignis. Striking first with Hydro Laser, I dismounted and switched to Vanworm. Deploying a Hypersphere, the powerful foe broke free, and for the first time, I deployed a legendary sphere, managing to capture one of the most powerful Pals I'd come across thus far. Not long after, I used the same strategy to secure a third Yormantide Ignis. Just before sunrise, I nearly captured a level 45 Wumpo, but lost it to burn damage. On the 71st morning, I collected another effigy and spotted a wild Menacing. Looking to add another Pal deck entry, I caught my prey off guard, but mid-battle, I was ambushed by a high-level Incineram Noct. Knowing that battling both of these dangerous Pals with damaged armor would be far too risky, I took to the sky, chancing one last Pal Sphere and receiving a punishing blast from Incineram. Thankfully, my sphere hit its mark, and with that, I registered my 100th Pal as I made my escape. Departing the sanctuary, I returned to Mount Obsidian and spent the rest of my day establishing a base at the ore nodes I had scouted the previous day. After clearing out the area, I decommissioned my lakeside base and relocated my POW box to Mount Obsidian. Upon clearing out all of the ore nodes, I added Yormantide Ignis to my party and spent the rest of day 71 between bases, queuing up tasks and collecting more resources. By the dawn of day 72, I had tasked my pals with another 30 legendary spheres. Base production was looking good, and was further improved with the addition of Yormantide Ignis. With my pals hard at work, I spent most of the morning exchanging goods at Fisherman's Point, before returning to Frostbound Mountain, where I would battle Cyblix for a second time. After defeating my frosty opponent, I attempted to complete my POW deck entry for Foxicle. Unfortunately, I only managed to find one lone Foxicle, so I returned to base and decided to try my luck at Mount Obsidian instead. Exploring the mountain range, I collected a few more effigies and spent the rest of day 72 catching a wide variety of fire pals. It seemed my decision to hunt on Mount Obsidian had paid off, and as the night came to a close, I caught 2 more Blazehowl Noct, and nearly finished my POW deck entry for Pyrin. The hunt continued into day 73, and after catching another Reptyro, I encountered my first Kelpsea Ignis, managing to exceed my POW catching goals, and reaching level 45. From there, I caught more Flambell, completed my PAL deck entry for Pyron, and encountered my first pair of Wixens, adding them both to my ever-growing collection. Despite the completion of my first major objective, I was going to need to grow much stronger if I wished to have any hope against the legendaries. With renewed vigor, I continued securing the local PALs, bagging more Kelpsies, Wixens, and Flambells within the volcanic peak. Things were going exceedingly well, which of course meant a reality check was inbound. By midday, I nearly burned to death, harshly misjudging the terrain I had found myself on. Rattled by yet another near-death experience, I decided I had accomplished enough for one day and returned to base. As my health recovered, I spent what remained of day 73 on production, gathering resources between bases, queuing up tasks for my pals, unlocking new tech advancements, and closing out the night, clearing the ore nodes at the desolate church. Returning to base on the 74th morning, I commissioned more ingots and hyperspheres, before setting out to collect more precious PAL fluid. After reminding the Gobfin tribes that I will always be a threat to them, I journeyed back to base for another long day of production and preparation. Tomorrow would mark a critical point in my adventure, as I seek to add another crucial PAL to my team. Hoping to be well armed for this next challenge, I commissioned my first assault rifle and purchased more ammunition from Fisherman's Point. Returning home, I continued assigning tasks, placed my recent stat point into health, claimed my assault rifle, and commissioned my first sword. What remained of day 74 was spent collecting resources and preparing more food for my hard-working pals. That night, I added my recently caught Wumpo Botan to my party, as tomorrow's battle was the very reason I needed this powerful grass type. With Wumpo's typing, level, and earthquake-resistant passive, it was going to prove useful in my battle against Anubis. On the dawn of day 75, I departed my base and set out for the Twilight Dunes. It wasn't long before I arrived at my destination, spotting the monument of Anubis on the horizon. Thankful to see Anubis was distracted by the Syndicate, I deployed Wumpo Botan, only to find that its poor navigation skills left it stuck behind a tree. Fortunately, Wumpo quickly got its bearings, landing its first successful strike against our opponent. Responding in kind, Anubis retaliated, pushing my pal back with earth tornadoes before setting its gaze upon me. Evading with the help of Galeclaw, I used the tree line for cover, but a misplaced grass tornado helped Anubis strike true, and my shield was decimated. Falling back to buy time, I redeployed Wumpo, using it for cover as my shield began to recharge. As if aware of my strategy, Anubis shifted its focus, but Galeclaw and I were ready, taking flight and evading the Earth Emperor's strike. Moments later, Anubis would charge once more, this time with blinding speed, connecting a devastating strike that would have ended me if not for my shield. Unable to afford another direct hit, I did my best to create distance, only to find myself faced with another aggressive pal. In a panic, I deployed Jormuntide Ignis, narrowly avoiding another strike. Realizing its master was in danger, Jormuntide Ignis released its fury upon Anubis, as I worked to dispatch our troublesome interloper. Fighting valiantly, Jormuntide Ignis bought me the time I needed, but inevitably fell to Anubis's earth tornadoes. Deploying my second Jormuntide, I fell back to the tree line for cover, and the decision paid off. As Anubis attempted another charge, it found itself locked in place. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Jormuntide and I released a volley of attacks. With Anubis weakened, I closed the distance and loosed a legendary sphere. With bated breath, I watched as Anubis rattled within the sphere, and to my relief, the battle was over. Anubis was now mine. With the battle won, I remained in the Twilight Dunes, completing my PAL deck entry for Hangyoos, before eventually departing and returning to base, spending what remained of day 75 gathering more resources. As day 76 kicked off, I upgraded our cooking production with the newly unlocked electric kitchen, before departing for the Twilight Dunes in hopes of catching a better Anubis. Taking note of the previous battle, I cleared out the surrounding pals to prevent any interruptions. Sticking close to the tree line for cover, I was able to avoid most attacks, while my pals, including my own Anubis, focused on dealing the damage. Following a long and carefully calculated battle, it took a few legendary spheres, but eventually, my second Anubis was captured. Though sadly, its passives weren't much better than the first, and with disappointment, I departed the desert. Returning home, I hoped to spend the rest of the evening peacefully, but before long, I was faced with another raid. I must admit, this raiding party fared better than most, managing to push deeper into my base than usual. Unfortunately for the raiders, none of them would live to tell the tale. With the base secure, I continued collecting resources before departing base 2 late in the evening to collect effigies, managing to find 4 more as dawn broke on day 77. Through the morning of day 77, I continued my hunt for effigies. My battle against the legendaries was closing in, and the bonus catch rate could be the difference between success and failure. Happy with what I found, I returned to base, deployed Anubis to the workforce, and departed to spend the day hunting Mazzarinas. Thanks to my new electric kitchen, I could now craft Mazzarina cheeseburgers, raising my attack by 20%, another helpful advantage in the coming battles. Fortunately, the day was not a complete bore, as I did manage to stumble across a lucky vanworm, capturing it with the help of Beacon. That night, I sold pals to the small settlement, purchased a bit of milk, and used my recently found effigies to enhance my catch rate. On day 78, I focused on ingredients for another useful dish, the rush boar hot dog, granting a 20% increase in defense. These delightful hot dogs could only be made from the freshest of slaughtered rush boar, so I spent a good portion of my day hunting them down. As I hunted throughout the day, there were a few notable events. I took on a Moss and Deluxe World Boss, adding another new PAL to my collection, and completed my PAL deck entries for both Nightwing and Mammarist, coming across a Mammarist that identified as a water type. Returning to base, I expanded my food storage by constructing a refrigerator, before traveling to Fisherman's Point to sell more PALs and purchase more ammunition. That night, I used a skill fruit to swap Wumpo's Aqua Burst with Seed Mines, hoping to make it a bit more effective against Anubis, and from there returned to the Bamboo Grove. Mounting Beacon, I traveled northeast to the dunes, hoping tomorrow I would catch the Anubis I'd been searching for. As the sun rose on day 79, my third battle against Anubis kicked off. Wumpo Botan's new moveset yielded promising results, inflicting heavy damage, though it became apparent that this Anubis was unlike the others, and before long, Wumpo's health began to falter. Yormantide Ignis was next into the fray, landing a series of attacks that dropped our opponent's health to 50% before rotating out for my first Anubis. Keeping a safe distance, I observed as the two Earth Emperors clashed, exchanging powerful blows. Realizing it was at risk of being captured, the wild Anubis attempted to take me down, but its attack failed to find purchase. My previous experience was paying off as I evaded with ease. Confident the fight would soon come to a close, I redeployed Wumpo Botan, its grass tornadoes taking Anubis' health to critical levels. Moving in to deploy a Pal Sphere, the wild Anubis caught me off guard, taking down my shield for the first time in the battle. In position, I took aim with a legendary sphere as the wild Anubis beckoned me to give it my best shot. Breaking free despite my legendary spheres, Anubis continued to charge, refusing to give up without a fight. Following a final grass tornado from Wumpo, I deployed my fourth legendary sphere, and with that, finally managed to capture an Anubis worthy of taking on the legendaries. Victorious, I returned to base and added the new PAL to my party. The increased defense from its burly body passive would prove invaluable against our future opponents. Receiving a raid notification a bit later, I descended into the valley, only to find a herd of bushies, managing to capture 6 of the troublesome pals before any could turn to flee. With daylight fading, I put my pals to work, mined a bit of ore, and reviewed my PAL deck. Time was running out. I needed to grow stronger before facing the legendaries. With a list of targets in mind, I set off for Mount Obsidian, spending what remained of the 79th night working to complete PAL deck entries. Most of the daylight hours of day 80 were spent continuing my hunt within Mount Obsidian. It wasn't long before I managed to complete my entries for both Flambell and Wixen, finally reaching level 46 in the process. Not long after, I would encounter some aggressive Kelpsie, and following a series of successful strikes, the fierce little monsters damaged my armor and depleted my health. Though in the end, I proved victorious, completing their PAL deck entry before heading to a nearby travel point and returning to base. Back at base, I repaired my armor, placed my first stat point into attack, and collected more ore. Late in the evening, I returned to the Fiery Mountain, focused on catching what few pals I still needed from the region, including Pyron Noct, Blazeout Noct, and Reptyro. On the dawn of day 81, I unlocked the PAL Metal Armor and continued my journey. My time hunting on Mount Obsidian was coming to an end, as most of its PAL deck entries were now complete. So, after catching my 10th Reptyro, I decided it was time for a change in scenery. Using a travel point, I headed north, donned my cold-resistant armor, and set out for the Astral Mountains, catching a few Malcris before coming across a local dungeon. Ready for a challenge, I headed inside, where I would battle various pals, including my first Maraith and a few Cyblix. It was at this point I discovered some of the pals in the dungeon could be incredibly stubborn. And after burning through an abhorrent amount of spheres on a Marwraith, I chose to ignore the dungeon pals and make my way to the boss. The level 43 Lunaris was indeed powerful, but its power did little to help it against the searing flames of Yormantide Ignis. And somehow it was easier to capture than the other pals found within the dungeon. Rewarded for my efforts, I received a level 2 attack pendant and departed the dungeon. Back in the overworld, the hunt went a bit smoother, catching a few more Mals and my first Ice-type Wumpos as the sun began to set. Hunting throughout the night, I continued to pursue various ice pals within the region, catching more Cyblix, my first Mammoris Christ, and several more Marwraiths. As the sun rose on day 82, I pressed onward, with some pals being easy to catch while others forced me to burn through spheres at a troublesome rate. Despite that, I persisted, catching my first 2 Cryolinks and more Wumpos, before my shotgun broke as I completed the PAL deck entry for Cyblix. With my primary weapon damaged and PAL spheres running low, it was time to return to base where I'd repair my gear and focus on production, starting with my PAL metal helmet. With the new helm complete, I finally possessed the best defensive headwear this world had to offer. All that was left now was to restock on PAL spheres. So I spent what remained of the day gathering resources between bases and queuing up more ingots. With the demand for ore increasing, I spent the 82nd night setting up an automated mining operation at my Mount Obsidian base. As day 83 kicked off, I deployed pals to my Mount Obsidian base and returned to my primary base to continue production. After making my base a bit more accessible for my new, larger pals, I found that I was once again low on cement, which meant it was time to check in with the Gobfin tribes. Little did I know I was in for a wild ride. Hunting the higher level biomes had depleted much of my ammo reserves, and I opted not to use my shotgun. Of course, this ended up being far more dangerous than I anticipated, and on what should have been an easy day, I came the closest to death I'd ever been. With only 23 health remaining, I narrowly avoided a terrible fate, cheating death once more with a well-timed dodge roll. Outraged that these lowly creatures would dare attempt to end my life, I rained down a storm of lightning, lead, and spheres the likes of which they've never seen. Satisfied with my vengeance, I journeyed to a nearby travel point, returning to base and resuming production. That night, I traveled to Fisherman's Point, where I spent the evening selling captured pals and stocking up on ammunition. Returning to base on the dawn of day 84, it was time to start prepping Yormantide Ignis and Anubis for their battles against the legendaries. For the past 83 days, I had set aside every PAL soul I'd found, with the hopes of strengthening my final team as much as possible. With their newfound strength, it was time to put my PAL team to the test. So I grabbed a few Mozzarella burgers and Rushboar hot dogs and journeyed to the Brothers of the Eternal Pyre Tower. It was time to take on my next tower boss duo, Axel and Orzurk. Anubis was first into the battle. Between its type advantage and my attack boost from the Mozzarella burgers, the battle was off to a strong start. After giving Anubis time to shine, Yormantide Ignis was next into the fray, landing a devastating fireball as I narrowly avoided a powerful beam from Orzurk. The fight was going smoothly, and while Orzurk did manage to land a couple of small attacks, I had done well to protect my health, remaining evasive as I rotated between pals. With my shield back online, I pressed the fight, conserving ammo by striking with my sword. Unfortunately, this was an insult Axel and Orzurk would not let slide, and moments after tearing through my shield, Orzurk released a devastating AoE attack, erasing nearly 70% of my health in an instant. Falling back, I raced into my inventory and consumed a Rushboar hot dog, sacrificing my attack buff, but bringing my defense up by 100 points. Hoping to finish the job, Orzurk began a relentless pursuit, connecting with another blow as I attempted to flee. Desperate for my shield to recharge, I called upon Galeclaw to create distance, but Orzurk was too fast, releasing a Dragon Blast, leaving me with a mere 49 health. My decision to eat that Rushboar hot dog was the only reason I was still standing. On the verge of death, I retreated behind a pillar, as it was slammed with Orzurk's dragon meteors. Noticing Yormantide was now in the crosshairs, I repositioned it not a moment too soon, as Orzurk's lightning rippled across the arena. The following minutes felt as if they were hours. Unable to provide offensive support, I focused on evasion while rotating and repositioning my pals, remaining vigilant on where the deadly Orzurk was at all times. Finally, the terrifying duo's health pool began to run dry, and as Anubis landed the final blow, I breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Not only did I survive the battle, but none of my pals were knocked out, proving to me that this team was more than deserving to take on the legendaries. Returning to base, I spent the rest of my daylight hours gathering ore before departing that evening to collect more effigies, hoping to enhance my catch rate once more before I reached the end of my journey. As the night came to a close, I stumbled across a sleeping Yormantide world boss. Confident that an army was no longer needed, I took on the powerful pal with the help of Beacon, capturing the swift Yormantide as the sun rose on day 85. As day 85 kicked off, I continued my hunt for effigies, picking up several more before making my way to a travel point and returning to base. After collecting ore from each of my bases, I queued up more ingots, prepped more food, and traveled to the sealed realm of the Swift, where I took on Verdash. Of course, Yormantide Ignis made quick work of the lowly grass type, and after a short battle, I added another new pal to my collection. Departing Verdash's lair, I began my flight east to the last frontier of my adventure, the Desiccated Desert, the final biome where my 100-day journey would eventually end, one way or another. Arriving in the strange new land just before nightfall, I set out to hunt pals, catching my first Dinossum Lux, my first Suzaku, and my first 3 Robinquill Terra. Later that evening, I caught another Cognito, followed by 2 more Lovanders, finally reaching level 47 as the night came to an end. On the dawn of day 86, I completed my PAL deck entry for Lovander and traveled to the Desiccated Mineshaft, where Yormantide Ignis and I took on a menacing world boss. Following a brief yet heated battle, Menacing was captured. Returning to the desert sands, I captured my second Suzaku before coming across a local dungeon. Unfortunately, the dungeon was a dud, and after failing to come across a single new pal, I made my way to the dungeon boss. Yormantide easily dealt with the Ragnarok boss, and we returned to the overworld, catching more Dinossums, Suzakus, and my first Rayhound. What remained of the 86th day was a blur of pal catches. Pushing myself alongside Beacon, I worked towards completing as many local pal deck entries as I could. My hunt for the legendaries would begin on day 95, meaning I had less than 10 days to gather more strength and experience. That evening, I completed my pal deck entry for Robinquill Terra just as the bitter cold of the desert night began to set in. Donned in my cold-resistant armor, I pressed onward, catching more pals throughout the night before arriving at the city of Dune Shelter, claiming a new travel point and using my recent level increase to unlock an improved weapon assembly line. As the sun rose on day 87, I explored the city of Dune Shelter, grabbed another effigy, and made my way back to base to repair my gear. With my armor in good condition, I placed another stat point into attack, sorted my inventory, and journeyed to Fisherman's Point to sell valuables and load up on ammunition. With that, I returned to the Desiccated Desert, continuing my quest to grow stronger. It was here I came across the strongest lucky pal I'd encountered thus far, an intimidating level 48 Robinquill Terra. The lucky pal put up an impressive fight against Yormantide Ignis, but in the end, it was captured, albeit at the cost of 6 legendary spheres. Pushing farther into the desert, I caught several more local pals, including Dinossums, Suzakus, and Beacons before stumbling across and capturing my first 2 Serpent Terras. By sunset, I managed to catch 7 of the new Serpents before the chill of the desert evening set in. That night, I laid eyes on what would eventually be my final destination of this 100-day journey, the legendary pair, Palladius and Necromus. Not quite ready for that altercation, I changed course, picked up a few more effigies, and closed out the night, completing PAL deck entries for both Cognito and Beacon. On the dawn of day 88, I ambushed another 3 Serpents, completing their PAL deck entry before stumbling upon an area rich with coal nodes. After catching several Dazzy and looting a skill fruit tree, I marked the area on my map in hopes of exploiting the abundant resources. From there, I focused on hunting Dazzies until their PAL deck entry was complete. After using my last Ultra Sphere on a lone Dinossum, I scooped up another effigy and decided it was time to head back to base to restock my spheres. Taking flight, I journeyed back to the city of Dune Shelter and returned to base. I knew the next few days would have to be spent on resource generation and production, causing me to seriously doubt I would reach level 50 before taking on the legendaries, something that made me quite nervous. In need of coal for more Ultra Spheres, I made the tough decision to decommission my Mount Obsidian base and journeyed back into the desert, making my way to the coal deposits I had marked previously. After my Yormantides and I cleared out the aggressive locals, I laid claim to the ore-rich biome and placed out pal beds as the night came to a close. The morning of day 89 was spent setting up a simple mining operation, deploying pals, and providing a feed box. With the setup complete, I worked alongside my pals to gather coal, returned to my primary base, and queued up more refined ingots. From here, a vast majority of the day would be spent mining between my 3 bases and the desolate church, aside from a quick break in which I built an improved weapon assembly line, commissioned more pistol ammo, and of course, more refined ingots. By nightfall, there was no ore left to collect between any of my bases, so I spent the evening visiting various travel points throughout the world, collecting all the ore and coal I could find. By the morning of day 90, I had my pals working overtime on sphere and ingot production. With only 5 days left before my final hunt kicked off, the reality that I wouldn't reach level 50 in time began to set in. Instead, I decided to push for level 48 and committed to spending the rest of my time strengthening my pals and my catch bonus. Utilizing my pal condenser, I upgraded Galeclaw's glider ability, and that night I departed the base to spend the evening collecting more effigies, hoping to achieve one final catch bonus before time was up. As the sun rose on day 91, I postponed my hunt for effigies and traveled back to the desiccated desert, taking to the sky and making my way to the third and final wildlife sanctuary, hoping I would find enough rare pals to push me into my 48th level. As I gathered treasures on the sanctuary's outskirts, I was blessed with an incredible find, a legendary handgun schematic, the first and only legendary weapon schematic I would find on this 100-day journey. Satisfied, I made my way into the protected biome to discover its primary occupant was Fingalope. Making the most of the situation, I proceeded to catch several of the rare pals before coming across an Incineram Noct. The Incineram was persistent, but I was equally stubborn, and after a 4th hypersphere, the pal was captured and I achieved my 48th level. Remaining in the sanctuary, I completed my pal deck entry for Fingalope and searched for more valuable treasure. That night, I completed my pal deck entry for Bushy and battled alongside Anubis, catching a few more Incineram Noct as the sun crept over the horizon. On the dawn of day 92, I stumbled across a rare and powerful pal known as Shadowbeak. Eager to add the rare pal to my collection, I took it on with the help of Beacon. Unfortunately, the beast rejected my legendary sphere and retaliated, ripping Beacon from the sky and following up with an attack that obliterated my shield and damaged my armor. Hoping to end the fight quickly, I struck with my shotgun and chanced a second legendary sphere, only for it too to be rejected. Deploying Yormantide Ignis to draw its attention, I tried to reposition for another shot, but before I could act, Yormantide decimated the rare pal with a powerful fireball. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. With my armor damaged and my only flying mount out of commission, I felt I had no choice but to depart. Setting across the ocean on Yormantide, I reached the shores of Desiccated Desert, set my sights on a local travel point, and made my way back to base. Back in my homestead, I used my recent level increase to unlock the heat-resistant Pal Metal armor and task my pals with its production. Next up was the legendary handgun, which, as it turned out, required a ridiculous amount of ingots and high-quality pal oil. So, after donning my new and improved armor, I revived Beacon and, you guessed it, spent the rest of the day collecting ore from everywhere you could possibly imagine, only returning home to throw more ingots into the furnace. Late that night, I returned to Fisherman's Point, where I spent the last hours of the day and a good chunk of the following morning selling captured pals. With money to burn, I kicked off day 93 by purchasing the 100 quality pal oil and used the rest of my gold to load up on shotgun ammo. Returning to base, I tasked my pals with putting together my legendary pistol before placing my recent stat point into health. Thankfully, it didn't take long for Anubis to assemble the new weapon, and upon its completion, I used the last of my basic ingots to queue up more pistol ammo. This was it, the end game. I may not have achieved level 50, but I was proud of how far I'd come. Continuing preparations for the final battle, I constructed more legendary spheres, strengthened Beacon with the PAL condenser, and visited the Statue of Power, increasing my catch bonus and pouring more PAL souls into Yormantide Ignis. My first legendary target was the Ice-type Frost Stallion, which meant I would need Yormantide Ignis in top form if I wanted to succeed. Unfortunately, Yormantide's dual typing of Dragon meant it would not resist ice attacks, so health and defense buffs were also important. The PAL soul buffs were a good start, but I wanted more. Returning to Wildlife Sanctuary 2, I spent what remained of day 93 hunting more Yormantide Ignis to use in the PAL condenser. On my last excursion to this dangerous island, I had struggled to survive, but this time I was dominating. Throughout the night, Beacon and I managed to capture 8 more Yormantide Ignis without so much as a scratch on my health. Departing late that evening, I made my way to a distant travel point and returned to base, boosting Yormantide Ignis further with the PAL condenser as the 93rd night came to a close. On the dawn of day 94, I used skill fruits to replace Yormantide's Dragon Cannon with Flare Arrow and swapped out Ignis Breath for Flare Storm. From there, I set out for the Astral Mountains in hopes of finding a few more large PAL souls and testing Yormantide Ignis's newfound strength against a powerful ice type. By midday, I unlocked a new travel point and arrived at the Forgotten Mineshaft, where Yormantide Ignis would face off against a level 46 King P.A.K.A. Christ. Remaining neutral and observing the battle, I watched as Yormantide gave an impressive showing, brushing off King P.A.K.A.'s attacks with ease, applying constant pressure with a series of fire-based moves. Within a few short moments, the King P.A.K.A. was done, and I ended the battle with the throw of an Ultra Sphere. Looting the King P.A.K.A.'s lair, I found a thermal undershirt before departing the mineshaft and coming across 2 back-to-back treasure boxes containing large PAL souls. From there, we made our way into another dungeon. Heading straight for the boss, Yormantide found itself matched up against another powerful ice type, and once again proved its worth. Unfortunately, the loot was subpar at best, and to make matters worse, I nearly froze to death returning to the overworld. Thankfully, my thermal undershirt put an end to the health drain, and we departed the frozen tundra, returning to base before the sun would rise on day 95. On the dawn of day 95, I grabbed my Rushboar hot dogs, repaired my gear, maxed out Yormantide's attack stat, and journeyed to the Astral Mountains. My hunt for the 4 legendary PALs had begun. Descending towards the frozen lake, I laid eyes on Frostallion for the first time, noting its intimidating presence. Touching down, I consumed a Rushboar hot dog, and the moment I closed my inventory, the battle began. With my pals and I underleveled, I knew I would have to play this fight very carefully, recalling and repositioning my pals before Frostallion's attacks could connect. So far, the tide of battle was moving in our favor. Yormantide had only taken minor damage, and for now my shield remained intact, though the tide of battle can be a fickle thing. Swapping Yormantide for Anubis, I was struck with an air cannon, and moments later my weaker Anubis was struck with Frostallion's Blizzard Spike, erasing 95% of its health in a single blow. Repositioning, I recalled Anubis and deployed Yormantide once more. Hoping to distract Frostallion, I unloaded my assault rifle to little effect, dodging an icicle cutter just as Yormantide's fireball slammed into our opponent. Beacon was next into the fray, and despite being my weakest fighter, it performed well against Frostallion, the stun effect from its lightning providing precious opportunities for headshots. As Frostallion charged another Blizzard Spike, I repositioned Beacon without a moment to spare, only to be grazed by another air cannon. Saving Beacon once more, it was swapped for my stronger Anubis as the Frostallion charged me in a blind rage. Evading with the help of Galeclaw, I watched as Anubis sprung into action. As Frostallion charged its next strike, I swapped Anubis for Beacon, losing my shield in the process. Without the protection of my shield, I was forced into cover by Frostallion's ice missiles, and as I recalled Beacon, I narrowly avoided a charge from Crystal Wing. Calling upon the strength of Yormantide, it answered, landing both Flare Arrow and Flare Storm before I was pushed back into cover by Frostallion's Blizzard Spike. Emerging from my cover, I opened fire, only to witness Frostallion's Crystal Wing strike Yormantide. Hoping to allow Yormantide to recover, I deployed Anubis, narrowly avoiding an air cannon, and from there made my way back to the high ground, where I proceeded to rotate and reposition pals until being forced to retreat. Using the terrain to my advantage, I did my best to provide support as my stronger Anubis continued to chip away at Frostallion's health pool. Rotating from my cover, my shield was knocked once more, but my health remained intact. Redeploying my weaker Anubis, I fell back to recharge my shield, and to my surprise, Frostallion seemingly lost interest in our battle. Worried that the Frostallion could regain its lost health, I consumed a Rushboar hot dog, equipped my shock grenades, and pressed the battle once more. Closing the distance, I began lobbing shock grenades into the battle, hoping to stun the legendary PAL, only to find that these too had little effect, as my weaker Anubis was struck with Crystal Wing. Swapping to my stronger Anubis, I repositioned and chanced another shock grenade, losing my shield in the process before redeploying Yormintide only to be grazed by a second attack. Eager for vengeance, Yormintide released its full arsenal of flame attacks, as I continued to use the terrain to my advantage. Swapping back to my stronger Anubis, I saved it from Frostallion's Crystal Wing with a well-timed reposition. Frustrated, the Frostallion charged, but was met with a shock grenade as I evaded with the help of Galeclaw. As if insulted, the Frostallion took aim with its most powerful move, but Galeclaw's increased speed made me a difficult target. It was only upon swapping back to Yormintide that it was able to connect with a mere air cannon, growing increasingly frustrated as my well-timed recalls limited the damage it could inflict on my pals. Thankful for the save, Yormintide struck with Flare Storm as Frostallion targeted me with its ice missiles, taking down my shield but receiving a punishing fireball from Yormintide. Swapping in Beacon, I hoped to stun the legendary POW while my shield recharged, narrowly avoiding another round of ice missiles only to be struck by another air cannon moments later. Realizing Frostallion refused to be stun locked, I swapped back to my stronger Anubis and focused on evasion until my shield finally returned. With my shield back online, I avoided another barrage of ice missiles, only to realize it would be followed by a deadly blizzard spike. Pivoting midair, I avoided the blast, but unknowingly walked into Frostallion's trap. With my shield down, I watched in horror as Frostallion prepared its Crystal Wing. This was it. This was the end. After everything I'd experienced, everything I'd lived through, the journey, the challenges, the victories, and most importantly, the friends, no, the pals, I had made along the way. Well, better to die here than at the hands of a Gumas, I guess. No, I can't let it end here. Breaking free, I rolled under Frostallion's wing, cheating death once more. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. I still had faith in myself, and more importantly, in my pals. Yormintide Ignis, Beacon, Galeclaw, Anubis. I knew I could never win this fight on my own, but I wasn't on my own. I was with the team I had created for this very moment, and together I knew we could overcome anything. More determined than ever, I pushed forward, tanking all 3 of its ice missiles. I released another legendary sphere, but the stubborn legendary still had plenty of fight left. Attempt after attempt after attempt, Frostallion continued breaking free as my pals and I fought for our lives to subdue the beast, until finally, the battle was ours. The first of the 4 legendary pals had fallen. With pride in my heart, I congratulated my pal team and set out to return home. Back in my homestead, I swapped out my weaker Anubis for Frostallion, and spent what remained of the 95th night using pal souls to prepare Frostallion for its battle against our next target, the legendary pal, Jet Dragon. Though before heading into battle to face Jet Dragon, there were a few things I'd need to do first. Fortunately, I had planned for this, which was why I gave myself 5 days to face the 4 legendaries. My first priority was crafting the Frostallion saddle, so I spent most of day 96 mining and refining ingots. By midday, the saddle was commissioned, and not long after, Anubis finished the job. Eager to try out my new legendary mount, I took to the sky above my homestead. Looking down on my humble mountaintop base, I reflected on the journey so far, as well as the journey that lie ahead. That evening, I traveled to Fisherman's Point, hoping to acquire enough ammo for the next 3 battles, selling all of my remaining valuables, as well as a significant number of captured pals, closing out the night, purchasing various forms of ammunition. As day 97 kicked off, I still wasn't quite satisfied with my ammo reserves, so I continued selling pals, trading off every pal that lacked impressive passives before picking up one last shipment of ammunition. All that remained now was to restock on Rushmore hot dogs, and I must admit, using Frostallion to accomplish this was a bit overkill. Returning to base that evening, I stored the spoils of my hunt, prepped a few ice grenades, and closed out the night, pouring more pal souls into both Anubis and Frostallion. On the dawn of day 98, I cooked up some Rushmore hot dogs, repaired my gear, added King Pekka Chris to my pal team, and departed for Mount Obsidian. With 2 powerful ice types on my team, I was hoping to have a definitive advantage. Though there was one small problem: the terrain. Jet Dragon's domain was filled with barren trees, and if I were to glide into them while evading, I would be a very easy target. Thankfully, Jet Dragon loved to wander, so while it was taking an afternoon stroll, I took it upon myself to clear out the area. doing my best to remain undetected as the legendary dragon made its rounds. Satisfied with the deforestation, I opened my inventory and consumed a Rushmore hot dog, only to exit and realize I had lost sight of Jet Dragon. My concern only grew as its health bar suddenly appeared. And of course, as I turned around, it was right behind me. In a panic, I tried to reposition, but Jet Dragon was too fast, landing a dragon burst that took down my shield. Disappointed with the fight's opening, I deployed Frost Stallion, finally creating some distance as it slammed into Jet Dragon with its crystal wing. As the two legendary opponents began to trade blows, I provided what little support I could before finding myself on the defensive once more, taking minor damage before Jet Dragon shifted its focus back to Frost Stallion. Watching the two legendaries clash was a sight to behold. And while Frost Stallion resisted damage from Dragon-type attacks, Jet Dragon had plenty of fire attacks in its arsenal, meaning victory would not come easy. On top of that, Jet Dragon's speed made it difficult to evade, postponing my shield regeneration. Thankfully, Frost Stallion's ability to freeze Jet Dragon in place helped me buy the time needed, and after a period of careful evasion, my shield was finally coming back online. Feeling a bit safer, I opted to give Frost Stallion a break and swapped it with King P.A.K.A. Crist, as Jet Dragon's constant barrage of attacks kept me on the run. While King P.A.K.A. did well to tank damage, its attack stat was quite low, and it wasn't long before Jet Dragon shifted its focus back to me, launching a fireball that homed in as I tried to escape. With my shield down and burn damage slowly draining my health, Jet Dragon continued its pursuit, launching a relentless assault as I struggled to swap Frost Stallion back into the battle. Despite Frost Stallion's return, Jet Dragon persisted, targeting me with its Dragon Meteor and Flare Storm before Frost Stallion reminded our opponent there was a bigger threat on the battlefield. With Jet Dragon's focus back on Frost Stallion, my shield recharged, and not a moment too soon, as I was slammed with another fireball. Luckily, the legendary's follow-up attacks were easily evaded, and its focus on me left it open to Frost Stallion's onslaught. Using Jet Dragon's determination to my advantage, I continued to bait it into attacks. The longer Frost Stallion could hold out, the faster Jet Dragon would fall. As our legendary opponent readied another fireball, I watched closely, breaking into a dodge roll at the last moment, keeping my shield intact. I was starting to grow accustomed to its moveset and timing. No longer did I wish to avoid Jet Dragon's focus. In fact, keeping it focused on me was the surest path to victory. Unless, of course, I were to run into a tree or something, and now you know why I cut them down. As the battle raged, the teamwork between Frost Stallion and I began to overwhelm our legendary foe. Even with my shield down, I continued pressing the fight, providing Frost Stallion with the support and opportunities it needed to land its highly effective attacks, as Jet Dragon's health fell into critical levels. Closing the distance, I deployed my first legendary sphere as my shield came back online. Breaking free, Jet Dragon evaded my next two legendary spheres, but thankfully the third hit its mark, though it did not hold for long. For the remainder of the battle, Jet Dragon and I would exchange blows. While I struck with legendary spheres, Jet Dragon struck with desperate aggression. As it evaded my throws, I evaded its flames, and at times the two would clash in an incredible show of determined wills. I was determined to prove my worth as a Pal Tamer, while Jet Dragon was determined to prove its worth as a legendary. And it was here, at the battle's end, where these two determined wills came to respect and accept one another as equals. Jet Dragon was now mine. Pleased with Frost Stallion's performance, I made sure to thank it for the incredible teamwork. Our synergy on the battlefield making me feel as if it had been with me all along. Victorious, we took to the sky, departing Mount Obsidian for the last time. Returning to base, I added Jet Dragon to my Pal team, and spent the rest of the 98th night preparing for our next battle, swapping in more Dragon-type moves on both Jet Dragon and Yormantide Ignis, as my next target would be Necromus, the legendary Dark Pal. On the morning of day 99, I spent most of my time tending to my base and managing production. The last two remaining legendaries occupied the same location, and taking them both on simultaneously would be far too risky. So my plan was to wait until nightfall to take on Necromus as Palladius slept. Thankfully, I had no shortage of powerful dragons on my team, and with dark types being weak to dragons, I was hoping to capture Necromus before the night came to an end. As the evening approached, I bid farewell to my Chillet collection and set out to the desiccated desert. Reaching the legendary pair, I waited patiently and watched as the sun fell below the horizon. With Palladius sleeping, it was time to take on my third legendary. So I consumed a Rushmore hot dog, open fired on the Dark Pal, and deployed Jet Dragon, eager to prove itself to its new master. Jet Dragon released its full arsenal of dragon attacks as Necromus retaliated with its dark laser. Keeping my distance, I provided support while working to avoid ranged attacks from our dark opponent. Worried that my pal's dragon meteors could awaken Palladius, I grew distracted, allowing Necromus to take down my shield. Without much cover among the desert sands, I did my best to remain agile, evading attacks, until my shield finally recharged, only for me to find myself facing off against 3 wild Lee's punks. Using my shotgun, I hoped to take them out quickly, but Necromus seized the opportunity, charging me in hopes of landing a close-range strike. Fortunately, I managed to evade the Dark Legendary, and as Jet Dragon continued to pressure Necromus, I dispatched the last of the Lee's punks. Moments later, I was slammed with a dark laser, losing my shield but protecting most of my health. Pressing the battle, I deployed ice grenades, as Jet Dragon continued its assault, only for Necromus to retreat towards its brother. In pursuit, I knew I had to lure Necromus away from Palladius once more, recalling Jet Dragon out of fear that it could wake Palladius. After landing a few rounds from my pistol, I had the attention of Necromus once more, and redeployed Jet Dragon. Taking aim, I was struck with another rock lance, forcing me to fall back and reposition my pal to provide cover. With Necromus preoccupied, I resumed my assault, repositioning as my shield was replenished. With my shield recharged, Necromus rushed me once more. Unleashing a volley of melee strikes I managed to avoid with a few well-timed dodge rolls, before its focus shifted back to Jet Dragon. Jet Dragon had done well to pressure Necromus, but as its health began to falter, it was swapped with Yormantide Ignis. As Yormantide released its fury, I couldn't help but notice morning was quickly approaching, and Necromus still had enough health to resist my pal spheres. Closing the distance, I unloaded my shotgun, as both myself and Yormantide tried desperately to subdue the Dark Legendary. As Necromus attempted to take down Yormantide with its charge attack, it was recalled and repositioned, retaliating with a powerful fireball as I continued to chip away at our foe's health. The desert heat slowly returning as the night came to a close. On the dawn of day 100, our battle against Necromus raged on. Rushing through my inventory, I managed to swap to my heat-resistant armor, as Yormantide held off our dangerous foe. Knowing we were out of time, I was forced to redeploy Jet Dragon, and as it landed a series of blows, I pushed forward, striking with my shotgun and releasing my first legendary sphere. Seeing Palladius on the horizon, I knew I would need to end this battle before it decided to intervene. Deploying a second sphere, my shield came back online, and as Necromus broke free once more, it was met with a shotgun blast and a third sphere. Defiant, the Necromus broke loose, erasing the last of my shield with a shadow burst. Equally defiant, I repositioned and took aim with another sphere, making contact but receiving a punishing nightmare ball in return. And as my vision returned, I released another sphere. On the verge of death, I continued to pressure Necromus. We were out of time. If Palladius were to join the battle, it would spell my end. I had no choice but to keep pushing. One of us was going to break, and I had come too far. As my shield returned, I circled Necromus, desperately attempting to seal it away, until finally, it broke. Necromus was mine, and now there was only one legendary pal that stood between me and my destiny. With no time to praise my pals, I consumed a Rushmore hot dog, made sure everyone on my team was well fed, and pressed onward into my final battle. Sure, I could have waited and allowed myself more time to heal. I could have added Necromus to my team for a type advantage. I could have even traveled to Fisherman's Point for more ammunition. But I was done waiting. I was done preparing. Everything that had transpired over the last 100 days, it had all led to this moment, and I was ready. I would meet this final challenge head on, and without delay. I was on the verge of completing every single challenge I had laid out at the beginning of this journey, to catch 100 different pals, to tame all 4 legendaries, and most importantly, to survive. Though in a way, I had failed that last challenge because a version of myself did indeed die. The weak and timid boy who had arrived on these islands was no longer with us. In his place stood a true pal tamer, a pal tamer who wouldn't back down from a fight, a pal tamer who put his faith in himself and in his pals, a pal tamer who had mastered the art of combat, who had conquered the elements, conquered the legendaries, and best of all, conquered his own fear. I was without a doubt an entirely different person than I was a mere 100 days ago. The man I had become would not back down when faced with adversity. He would not waver in his determination, and when he set his mind to something, he would see it through no matter the cost. This man didn't hesitate to take on Palladius, for in his mind, the outcome of this battle was decided before it ever began. After all I had accomplished, after all I had learned, what chance would Palladius have against me? What chance would it have against my pals? Palladius would have easily defeated the boy who arrived 100 days ago, but against who I had become, it was hardly even a fair fight. I may not have reached the max level, I may not have obtained the best gear, and I may not have had a pal team with the perfect passives, but what I did reach, obtain, and have was a level of experience and tenacity strong enough to move mountains and challenge the legends of this world. The bonds I held with the pals that fought by my side were stronger than any legendary could ever hope to become, and they were the reason why Palladius never stood a chance. And with the throw of a single legendary sphere, the final legendary pal was mine. At long last, my challenge was complete, but was my journey truly over? Was this the end of my story? Well, my friends, that's for you to decide. You see, it's been a long time dream of mine to make a 100-day video, so of course I poured hundreds of hours into this project in the hopes that you would enjoy it. So if you would like to experience more stories like this, or perhaps see this one continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and let me know what kind of story you would like to see next in the comments below. I'll be sure to read through the comments in hopes of finding my next 100-day challenge. I learned a lot making this video, so at the very least I can promise the next 100-day video won't take me a year and a half to put together. Before we depart, I want to thank all of you for giving me a chance to share this adventure with you. As always, thank you so much for your time today, and I wish you the best in all of your gaming adventures.